So it's a game I've been working on for a long time. I first made the engine for it. I've been working on that for years, and then at some point decided to start a company around it to actually build a game on top of it. I've been searching for like a kind of like a new way to do rendering that kind of bypasses all the AAA complexity basically for a long time, and had lots of experiments. And at some point, I made this voxel renderer with ray tracing, and it was surprisingly fast. It was like, I can actually make a game out of this. This is going to be awesome. And yeah, and then managed to get a team together to work on it, and we've been working on that for like the last 3 years. Um, I guess summary for people that don't know what it is. It's gameplay wise, it's a blend of first person shooter, RPG, survival gameplay styles. It's a very kind of creative game in the sense that everything is buildable, destructible, that kind of thing. It has a unique look. It's a fully ray traced game, which is kind of unique. Like even the primary view of the game is ray traced, which most games that say they're ray traced don't even do. So it has a very unique look with very unique kind of lighting and lots of detail, lots of voxel that looks very, very pretty. Um, and yeah, we're bringing that to early access very soon, hopefully maybe in a month from now at the earliest. Um, yeah, take it from there. I guess another thing to mention is like a big thing we have is because everything is so dynamic and so buildable, we have a super nice in-game editor that allows people to build their own worlds. Our gameplay is also such that um, it's very easy to kind of bend the gameplay to your will. So if you're the kind of person that just wants to make an outright first-person shooter world, or you want to make a story-driven RPG world, or more of a kind of survival experience, like all these things are possible kind of within our game. So it's almost like I wouldn't say you can design your own game. That would be taking things too far, but you can definitely make your own kind of gameplay experience
Yeah, you can
within
really
our
tell
game.
your own stories within it.
Yeah,
One of the
exactly.
things that I noticed pretty quickly was that like all of the different levels that you're currently offering in the demo that I played, they have genres on them. Like, it literally says like this is a detective
Ah,
story, it's etc. And I thought that was nice because that will. I'm imagining in the future when people are making their own content and uploading it and sharing it with people to some degree that
yeah,
that will be useful for search engine
yeah. We
optimization.
want people to go and it's like, I want to play a certain kind of world. I want a certain kind of experience, and being able to find those. Exactly how we do that will remains to be seen. But what you're seeing is cool because basically we have a couple of in-house designers. And I mostly just told them to go wild, and the results are what you're seeing in the sense that, like, each of them took that kinda in their own way in terms of, like, what they wanted to create, and so, yeah. The downside is that we still need to work on making these worlds a little bit more coherent in terms of, like, storyline and whatnot, but the upside is that you can really see that you can have very different experiences in our game.
So are you the primary storyteller of the kind of the overarching branching between these different stories? Or
I wouldn't say so. I'm certainly I mean, I'm the original designer of this game, if you will. But nowadays we have a lead designer on board that has lots of narrative experience that I don't have. So I try to I try to let people that know better do their thing when it comes to story. And the designers individually, like, are these the ones that design the quests and the NPCs and what they're saying and whatnot. So with that, they're shaping the story quite intensely as well. I'm not dictating them that they should do that in any particular way, mostly. So
yeah, it's really interesting. Like I had written you the other day, like, hey, did you like Fez or whatever? But I like
ah,
the sort of meta storytelling that goes on with spoilers for folks who haven't played the game yet. But so you are in this world that you're the theme of the game is that you're able to create your own stories and create your own world and such. And there's a part where you are confronted by this mysterious character who kind of has a moment where I would describe it as similar to the red pill versus blue pill
mm,
moment in the Matrix. And I really like that. I thought that was a really nice touch, and it takes you kind of like it's not out of the story, it's like, this is the story. The story is that
Hmm.
you are a creator, maybe you're going into another dimension that you didn't really, fully understand if you were just one of the other NPCs in this world, and I thought that was so interesting and so cool. Not
Cool. I'm
necessarily
glad
the most
that's.
original thing in the world, but awesome
uh,
nonetheless.
I'm glad that's working. It's a little bit like you call that, like, a fourth wall breaking, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's also a little bit dangerous because some people want to just stay kind of in the atmosphere of the game. So, um, yeah, we'll see how that develops. I'm glad you like it.
yeah. So, I mean, what were your sort of the influences that you had for making such a game? I've noticed, especially in the last several years, that survivor games are getting pretty big. Uh,
Yeah.
I've seen a couple that seem to be just trying to make a survival game because they're popular and therefore, sort of lose the ability to make a good game. It's just like checking all the boxes. This didn't appear to come about in that way.
Oh, yeah. If anything, I must admit, like, survival being one of the three gameplay pillars that we have.
Mhm.
But the current game as it stands is not particularly survivally. We're still kind of working on that aspect, if anything. And it's also partially kind of the direction that designers have taken it. Like they've made it quite quest and story driven, which is really cool, but it makes for a very particular game. Um, at the moment. And I do think there's a lot to survival. I think it blends well with the other two in the sense that, like, survival almost feels like an extension of an RPG. In an RPG, you're building up to be very, very powerful. So also survival is similar, except you're struggling like a lot more. It's both about kind of building yourself up in a particular world using whatever resources you can get your hands on. So um, we want to do that. In terms of influences, so it's interesting, if you go look online where people talk about our game, a lot of people go like it's Minecraft with guns, or lately, thanks to Notch, they're going it's Minecraft 2 or something like that. And while I am very proud of that comparison, and I think it's all awesome, it's certainly currently not a very good comparison because we are not really like Minecraft at the
Right.
moment in terms of gameplay. That kind of open-ended procedurally generated world. We don't have that. Our worlds are currently they are all made by designers, so they're much more specific. As a consequence, they're probably also more beautiful, but they're not as open ended as Minecraft is. That said, personally, I've played thousands of hours of Minecraft at this point, and I love the game. And one of the things I appreciate most about Minecraft is just the feeling that you're in a world where absolutely every block is modifiable. Like when you're playing Minecraft, you don't feel like you're in some kind of static scenery or whatever. You look at any mountain or whatever. It's like I can dig right through that if I want to. I can make my base right in the middle of that mountain if I so desire. There's nothing going to stop me. And that kind of level of agency and creativity, and I'm in control of this world. I can do with this world whatever I want to. I think I think is super important, and I think that's where a lot of other games fall flat. You play like a AAA game nowadays, and it's like, yeah, it highlights one thing you can interact with, and the rest of the world is all completely static. You can't touch it, you can't even move things. It feels so disappointing after having played games like Minecraft. I feel people that have spent a lot of time with Minecraft, they have different expectations of how interactable a game is. And that's probably the most important aspect that we're trying to um, inherit from Minecraft, if you will. Um, in our game, still, you'll need certain tools to be able to break certain things down and whatnot. So there's limitations. But in theory, you can, any world you're in, if you get the right tools, you can break the entire world down. You can delete it all and just end up with like nothing. Um, and I think that kind of feeling, even if you're not going to act on it, that level of power is something that really appeals to certain certain group of gamers. It certainly appeals to me a lot. And of course, most game designers they built the game they want to play. So uh, there you go. So yeah, a lot of influence from Minecraft. Um, what I really do not enjoy in Minecraft is the combat. I think it's very clunky and
Yeah.
not that fun. And I've played a lot of first person shooters in my life. I think they're very fun. So our game has guns and, they're satisfying to use, unlike, hitting skeletons with a sword in Minecraft. So um trying to do better there and mix in uh, aspects of other games. And I think the other aspect, I guess, is, a little bit more goal driven. And Minecraft does not have too much in terms of quest in the vanilla game. Uh, we're trying, at least for those players that want to have a reason why they're in that world and why they're doing things, to have interesting NPCs with interesting stories. Um, so yeah, that's how we're different. I guess, very influential games for me are, of course, the Bethesda games when it comes to the RPG side of things. Also have a big history, like in shooters, playing games like Doom and Quake since forever. So, um, yeah, I'm trying to mix that all in a wonderful cocktail of gameplay.
Yeah, it's very, it has the RPG elements, and it's very simple, though, like, where you basically, when you level up, you just pick one of 3 upgrades,
Hmm.
so on and so forth, as opposed to, doing something similar to Fallout, say, or going full-blown RPG mode with, like, the old school Dungeons& and Dragons character, building style. I thought this was a nice way to, make it, I would say easier, but also sort of kid friendly. Like a kid could jump in and just like really easily understand and intuit this. And even an old person who doesn't really play video games could do the same thing. Or me who's lazy, uh, just doesn't want to think too much. But I really like the the progression that you get as you start off in the first kind of like island where you get to go out and, like, okay, you meet a person, they give you a quest, and then you just sort of have this log of like, okay, these are all the different things you can do on the island. But there is an overarching goal, as you stated earlier, where basically your point is to gather up all of these orbs and get the heck
Hmm.
out of here. But you don't know that from the jump. You sort of iteratively discover what you're supposed to do as you go. And if you want to, you can just run around shooting zombies. I mean, that's fun too, or slimes, or what
Yeah.
have you.
That's
Um,
actually what we see that people do is like when I watch videos of people playing it, it's very interesting that a lot of them they start discovering, that the world is very modifiable kind of thing.
mm,
And they completely stray off the quest and they just start whacking everything with their sword or with a gun or whatever. And they just spend a whole bunch of time doing that, which I think is kind of as intended. So
yeah.
and yeah, the leveling up system I would say that is still to be developed further. One thing that you noticed definitely that you just get to pick from 3, that's also very intentional.
Mm,
What I'm trying to do here is make every playthrough a little bit more interesting by not like there's certain players going like, "Oh, I figured out that I'm gonna put all my points into damage because that's the way I like to play, and I get the most powerful character the most quickly." But that does result in kinda like this min-maxing style of gameplay where everything always feels the same kind of thing. And by making this picking, it's like sometimes you have to make do. It's like, okay, this time I'm a character that doesn't have as much damage because I didn't get to pick those things, but I'm much tankier or I can run faster or whatever. And therefore, your playstyle will differ um, every time. And that's kind of a direction we're trying to go with this um, to 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 ask players to kind of experiment with that.
Yeah, Vampire Survivors, I think, really had a huge influence on making it's in vogue now to kind of force the player, like, "Here, you have 3 options. That's it.
Mm,
Figure it
okay.
out." Sort of a random sort of thing, but, you level up, you get 3 you choose between 3 traits, and then that's what you level up again, and then you can choose again, and so on and so forth. But it does make every new playthrough interesting. It's you can't just be like, I want to be, 100% damage focused. I don't care about how much health I have. I don't care about this
Hmm.
or whatever that happens to be. Um, but overall, like it makes a lot of sense, I think, to do it that way. Even even from just the designer standpoint, it gives you the ability to sort of like introduce a bit of randomization
Yeah.
without it being overt. So I wanted to ask: is it random or is it based on the number of levels that you've made that you get certain choices?
Which of the 3 it currently picks to offer you is
Mm,
completely utterly random, yes. There's
okay,
no logic behind that in any kind of way.
right. Yeah, yeah, that's a cool choice, and
So
I
you
do
can
like.
be lucky, unlucky, and it's like, "Oh, well, you only get the." Well, there's 3 choices, right? So there's usually something good in between them, but, you can be unlucky and it's like, "Hey, you get to upgrade your carrying capacity, your swimming ability, and maybe something else that you didn't want," and it's like, "Okay, well,
Right.
deal with it."
Thus far, swimming has not really come into the game for me very much, other than just skirting around the sides of the island or whatever. But I can
Mm,
imagine you might end up in a situation where, oh, I really wish I had upgraded that skill. And if you had been forced to do so ahead of time, you'll be like, "Oh, thank God I got introduced that choice, and I didn't."
Yeah, it's actually if you do go swimming, you'll find that swimming is actually somewhat dangerous.
Mm,
Um, like if you stay in the water long, it depletes your stamina, and if you're in the water with no stamina, you can start taking damage and sinking away. So that's not a thing on like the initial islands that we have, but on the larger bodies of water, it's it's some places you might want to go might be a little bit more challenging because of that feature. And that's kind of, I guess, a survival ish aspect of the game. I was kind of inspired by Valheim on that mechanic where, you're really looking at the world and there's certain crossings, like, I'm not going to be able to make that. And I thought that was very interesting that you have to create a boat. You can't just say, I'm going to swim all the way across the sea like you could do in, survival light games like Minecraft. You can swim forever. Doesn't matter. Um, So I thought that was interesting in terms of a way that a designer can limit where you can go in the world or, you know, make that a more interesting choice, basically.
You were talking about wanting the combat to be, more fun than it is in
Mhm.
Minecraft, say, and everything. We actually, I don't know if you were in there, but we were connected at least by people in the Warfork Discord. So folks that were, it was just like a fork of Warsaw, which is a
Oh,
fork of a bunch
right.
of other things, all that kind of thing. But essentially, first person shooters that are very much like old school Quake, CPMA,
Mhm.
heavy combat oriented games. So apparently, at least you have fans in there, who
That's
are
that's
looking at this
cool.
game from that perspective.
Well, I have a lot of history there, right? I still play the game Quake World to this day regularly. And you'll also find that Voxile, some people even sometimes complain about that. It's, if you will, it's on the fast side. Like the default walking speed is higher than most games. You're very agile in terms of how you can jump from place to place. You can make big
Oh yeah,
jumps. Um, and yeah, the gunplay, depending on the kind of gun you get, there's definitely crappy guns in some of the worlds, but it is pretty powerful. So and that is intentional. Again, is kind of my background, so it's what I like. Uh, but yeah, Warsaw is all that's all very Quake adjacent, I would say. So, and I also used to work on a open source game and engine first, like it's called Cube, which like there's also a lot of people in that community who've been following what I'm doing with Voxile kind of thing. So there's lots of connection there.
yeah. I love Quake World. I actually went to QH LAN a couple of years ago and
Oh,
hung out
really?
with like Locktar is an old friend and
Oh, really? Dang. Yeah.
Jihara also. Yeah, we worked together a
I,
lot.
at least I know of all those people. I don't know them
Yeah,
personally, but I always, always watch their matches. So pretty amazing people.
yeah.
Skill level is off the charts.
Really, really loved actually being there in person to watch the tournament because, yeah, I mean, seeing it online is one thing, and then seeing them all at their desks, like, and there's like no bad blood. Like everybody's like super cool,
Oh yeah.
just
Yeah.
total friendly competition. But
Because the community is so old by now is like
mm,
everyone knows everyone. It doesn't make any sense
yeah,
to try to be a shitty player, and it's not work very well.
well, it's mostly like dads at this point. It's like the
Yeah,
same group of people that
absolutely.
were at each other's throats maybe 20 years ago. It's like, man, we've been at each other's throats for 20 years, and we all have kids now. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's amazing.
so when did you start playing Quake?
I did start right at the start in '96, and I was lucky to be studying for my PhD at the time. So I was at university, and we had like a nice internet connection there. So had a big advantage over all the modem players. Sorry,
Yeah.
modem players. Um, so yeah, played since then. Kept at some point Quake 2, Quake 3 came out. I just kept playing. Took a couple of breaks along the way, but a couple of years ago I started playing again, and I've been playing ever since actually. And there's a good group of people in North America that play the game. So it's small, but still big enough that you can get your games going.
Yeah, it was a struggle. It's probably like several years ago now, but there was the US Quake and Doom community that was ran by a couple of dudes named Nationwide Moose and Messiah, and I
Oh
had a
yeah,
lot of like involvement in some of the tournaments that got planned there. But it was really a struggle not necessarily to find people in North America who want to play Quake, but do so competitively, specifically in Quake World. And we hosted a
Yeah.
couple of pretty good solid tournament turnouts, and then I think one year I had a charity event where I got, oh my goodness. I got a couple of, like, top level Quake World players to just kinda show up and do, like, a exhibition, 3 or 4
Mm,
maps, and that was really, really fun. But, yeah, generating interest amongst, like, young people in arena FPS is incredibly hard. It's yeah, they're used to something like Minecraft where they're a god and they can do anything they want. I'm like, "Well, this game, not only does it have a really high skill ceiling, but also doesn't teach you how to do it. You gotta just know the right people and get introduced
yeah.
to all the different techniques and, be
It's
able to
it's
open up
hard.
your game's files and modify things and all kinds of stuff."
I'm actually not disappointed, like, the amount of, like, new players that are still flowing in the North American Quake World community is pretty good. We still even
Yeah,
occasionally have tournaments, like, we're still in the finishing stages of a dual tournament that was North America and also people from Australia
yeah.
joined in. Um, and that's still ongoing, and it has some amazing players in there. Um, really, really, really good games. So on par with the best of Europe, really. But yeah, Europe has the advantage that it's so much larger community. They can actually have, 4-on-4 leagues and stuff like that, which
Yeah.
in North America wouldn't work so well anymore.
S Scandinavia, I think by far is the dominant force
Oh yeah,
in Quake World, but it's because it's the same 5 or 6 people that have been playing since the game came out together on high speed internet or at LAN parties and such, so,
yep.
um,
They just keep going.
yeah, like, I think at the tournament we were all very proud. There's like we have 1 American who made it into the finals, but otherwise it's Finland, Norway,
Yeah,
Sweden, etcetera.
yeah. Last QH LAN, we had a couple of Americans go down there, and
Mm.
some of them pretty good. So
Are
one
you,
day we'll win.
yeah, one day.
I can only hope.
It's funny that you're, like, cheering for the American side now, but how long have you been in the States?
Yeah, that's funny because I'm actually from
Mm,
Holland.
okay.
I actually spent most of my early Quake World career in the UK. That's where I was studying. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, I've been in the United States since 2004, so 20 years now. Um, and some of that in Texas, and most of that in California. Um, so yeah, very
I
much part
I
of the U.S.
spent
now.
so you said you were in, like, San Francisco. I lived in
Yeah.
Monterey, if you know where that is, for
Oh yeah,
about
of course.
a year.
Been there plenty of times. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful, especially when you go down to Carmel by the sea and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's amazing. Yeah,
But,
I love going down there.
uh, like, whereabouts in Holland? Like, Amsterdam area or
Oh yeah, I was born in Utrecht and I studied in Amsterdam. I lived a little bit all over the place, but yeah.
yeah, I have, friends all over the country. I don't know why, but I'm just like, I attract Dutch people for some
Oh,
reason, but I
you must
really,
be a very rude personality. That would be the way to attract Dutch people.
forward, yeah, being
Yes,
just
they're very
assertive.
direct kind of thing. Yeah.
Uh, no, I really loved, just going all over the country, so, like, specifically, like, one of my best friends lives in Hendrik Ido Ambacht, which is near
Oh,
Rotterdam.
okay.
Yeah,
I've
and
heard of that.
then
Never been there, but yeah.
it's a yeah, it's a weird place to, like, I tell people, like, "Where I'm going to Holland," and they're like, "Where are you gonna go?" I'm like, "Oh, Friesland and, like, this other town you never heard of," and you're listening to KEEP in the Keep. Please take a moment to tell at least one other person how much you enjoy the show. That's right. Grab that link and send it to that buddy you're thinking of who you know would be interested in what we're talking about right now. Maybe post it somewhere. I know it seems scary, but you can do it. I believe in you. Don't hesitate to leave a comment and a 5-star review, a like, wherever you're listening. And if you want, Patreon supporters for this show get episodes early, access to our secret Discord channel, chances to suggest questions to our guests, our games, and whatever else I can do for you. Every little bit helps. This podcast directly supports my ability to do what I love and take care of my growing family. The link is in the show notes. Thank you, bless you, stay in the keep. Like, most people just go straight to the red light district of Amsterdam, say that they've seen Holland, and that's it. I went all
Oh my
over,
gosh.
but it's a beautiful place, and yeah, like you said, lots of rude people, but I get along with rude people, I think, so,
So
I had this experience where I was getting off a train in, like, a small town in the middle of the night, and I just had a backpack on. This dude just walked right up to me, he's like, "Hey, you're not from here," and I'm like, "I'm not." He's like, well, where are you going?" I'm like, "I don't know, I'm gonna go find a hotel, I'm meeting my friend in, like, 3 days," and he said, "Okay, you will come with me," and I'm like, "Alright, yes, sir," and took
really?
me yeah, literally took me to his house, introduced me to his family, gave me a beer, called the hotel that was, like, in the next town over, booked me a
Hmm.
room, and drove me there because he was just so assertive about, "You're not just gonna wander around on the streets." I'm like
Hmm.
and it was nice, but it was also very direct, as opposed to Scandinavia where no one will ever do that. You'll never have
Hmm.
a stranger just walk up and talk to you for no reason. Um,
Right. Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There, they really need to know you before they start talking. Yeah,
for sure, for sure.
that's funny.
So you studied in the UK and then you came to did you go to Texas first? Or
No, I actually spent some time in Germany first. So I worked for Crytek there on the original Far Cry
right,
game.
right.
Um, and after that is when I moved to the United States.
Okay.
Yeah. So my first to Texas, that was working at a university, actually. We had a master's program for game development. And I had someone put it in my head that I'd be a good, programming teacher for game development of some sort. That was actually a lot of fun. I had so many students and so many projects. It was really cool. And while I worked there, also worked some with like the local Texas game companies, and particularly with Gearbox on Borderlands and whatnot. And but yeah, at some point decided that California was going to be for me, and moved over here and did some more work for game companies. I also worked for EA Maxis, but at some point decided to join Google because Google was going to start up a game team, and I wanted to be part of it, and did that for a while. And yeah, after a while being there, I was like, I need to be doing what I need to be doing, which was, working on this kind of game project that I'm doing right now. So I set it in motion, and luckily it all kind of worked out so far.
Yeah, it seems to be going well enough for you, man. I mean,
Hmm.
like I said, yeah, just watching the Kickstarter kind of grow over day by day, and like, so is this your primary work right now is Voxile, or do you have other things going on as
Oh
well?
yeah, 'cause I'm
Yeah,
100% on this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I like that.
So
I admire that a lot. Just being able to take those risks and go all in on your own idea, as opposed to
yeah,
working for
at some
a
point you
company.
just got to ask yourself, like, what do I really want to do in life, and then
Yeah.
try to accomplish it. And yeah,
So the willingness to get up and uproot your life and go to another place for work or otherwise is very admirable because most folks don't do that. Even though you know, in some circles, it's like everyone has done that, obviously, or we wouldn't be here. But just to the general person, they never leave home. Do you feel like you were always an adventurous person, or just not tied to any
yeah.
particular place?
I'm not sure if I always was like that, but I guess the more you do it, the more you notice it's not a big deal, and then you keep doing it. I think that's
Right.
that's probably it. It seems scary to go live in another country, but then you do it, and it's a lot of fun. And then you go, like, where am I going to go next? And suddenly you're just kind of open to opportunities from different places. Like I ended up in Texas because I was working with people in Germany that were from Texas, and they knew that they were starting up this program at the university there. And it's like, I was like, oh, I bet that'd be cool. And then they're like, are you sure? Because I'm going to hook you up with the, the dean of the program. And sure. And I fly down there. I had really good experience with these people. And before you know it, I'm living in Texas. So, um, but yeah, that was already after having lived in a couple of countries in Europe. So and I generally like the idea of going to live in the United States. I'd already been there a bunch of times, and I just generally like the culture here, which is a strange thing to say for a European, but I do. Um, and yeah, all worked out. And I'm probably not going to go anywhere for a while. So
No, I think that's great, man. So just in general, like Bay Area kind of stuff. Did you adopt a love for football, or have you?
I haven't
fully
gone quite that far. I
okay,
guess I must say, even when I was in Europe, I was never that much into sports,
right.
unless it was like snooker or Formula One or whatever. So yeah, all the sports that go here in the United States, I have no idea. I had this lady pick something up the other day, and I brought it to my front door, and she was all like, "Yeah, oh, I'll take it quickly because I'm sure you're watching the Super Bowl. I didn't mean to interrupt." And I'm going like, "What? Oh, that's going on today?" You know,
Yeah.
I had no idea. So my idea of watching sports is watching, QH LAN replays. So
I understand both sides, but it's really interesting. Like as you said, like I don't think most Europeans would say that they fully like I just feel at home in American culture. I didn't feel at home in European culture for the most part. I would say I like the Netherlands probably more than any other country I've been to that's not America, but it is interesting. Just finding yourself as a stranger in a strange land, I think, is one of the most important things that any young person could do, just to really figure out what is it that I really like and don't like. Because you get thrown into another culture, and you very quickly realize the differences, and then you choose what you do and don't assimilate to, as opposed
mhm.
to just kind of like this is who I am from the beginning. So like,
I would say so. Yeah, I would. I've talked about this with people many times, and I would absolutely recommend everyone to try this at least once. Like it will change your life having lived in another country, and you will never be the same.
yeah.
In For what I see, in a good way. So, to everyone listening, come on, let's go. Figure out where you want to be. Do it.
My wife jokes with me a lot that there's very few places in the world where we could go and I wouldn't be able to find a couch to sleep on between the games industry and the military. Like I just have
Mm,
people all over the world. Like you want, hey, want to fly to Cairo for a
mhm.
couple weeks or whatever. Like I know a guy we could sleep on his couch probably. So it'll just cost us a plane ticket and whatever we spend while we're there,
That's
kind of
awesome.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I had the same at some point. I did like a trip around the world, and I just stayed at people I knew
yeah.
throughout the world. It was pretty
Couch
awesome.
surfing, very
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Where are some of the more interesting places you've been?
On that trip, I went to Japan, Korea, China, Australia, uh, India, Singapore, Dubai, Turkey, a bunch more places. And yeah, most of those places I hadn't been to, so that was super cool. Um, I still need to do more, but good start.
What did you take away from that trip, though?
Um, I think it's similar to what you were saying before. Is that actually a lot of these places, like in terms of what they do, like there's so much similarities. Like the biggest difference is actually the language. Like
Right.
you come to places like you're in China, whatever, and it's like, yeah, okay, my Chinese not that great, so that's definitely a big hurdle. But everything else that's going on is like it's not that different from other places, and certainly nowadays, of course, but technology invading everything, so it's not that crazy if you can overcome the language hurdle. And even that's not so hard. Like I remember just struggling with just a couple of Chinese words and just throwing some English in there, and I was able to do absolutely everything. So,
Yeah, I've found that oftentimes, and privileged as an American as I am, basically you need to know how to ask someone if they speak English. Like,
mhm,
and then, I mean,
in
be
the
polite.
language, yeah,
For me, I also found that like just expressing polite like gratitude is probably the most important thing. Like learning how
mhm,
to say thank you
yes,
goes a long way in whatever like country you happen to be in. Maybe and depending on your goals, maybe like if I'm in a Spanish speaking country, I need to know how to say two more beers, please, etc.
yes.
Um, maybe know how to say I love you if you're into that sort of thing.
Ooh, yeah, can
Yeah,
come in handy for
yeah.
sure.
It's not that hard, and
Don't want to miss those opportunities.
I find it to be like as I said, being sort of privileged to be from an
Hmm.
English speaking country. Because if you go to other places, I feel like the struggle is that you learn your native language, and then you must learn English in order to be able to participate in the
Mm,
world. And to a large degree, if I talk to someone from Pakistan or pretty much anywhere that's quote underdeveloped countries, the first thing they're gonna do is learn English if they want to be able to participate in, like, "I wanna go to university, I wanna go study science, I wanna" any
Mhm.
of this stuff, English. Um,
Yeah. So in a lot of countries, certainly where I'm from, that's
yeah,
almost like kind of a guarantee because we get so much English media and
yeah,
we learn it at school. So it's not even much of a struggle. In fact, I would say that you native English speakers are at a disadvantage because, a lot of you only really speak English. I'm not sure about you, but whereas, I was young and was able to speak English, French, and German pretty okay. So,
yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm fluent in any other language, but I've just been blessed that I studied languages, so I had
oh,
French
really?
in school, and then I studied Arabic while I was in the military,
Oh,
and
wow.
then I got to go live in Denmark, and, Danish is one of the more annoying languages I've had to
Oh
actually
my gosh.
yeah,
Yeah. Whenever I hear Danish, I'm like, the funny thing is people mistake it for Dutch or mistake the country even for Holland sometimes.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm like, it's completely incomprehensible to me. More
yeah.
so than say Swedish. Swedish, I can kind of, it seems easy to learn. Danish, oh my God.
Uh,
It sounds crazy.
the 3 key Scandinavian languages are so similar, in terms of, like, the written language, so if I'm reading any of those 3, I'm pretty good,
Mm,
I'm solid, but understanding a Danish person speaking is like the joke is, it's a if you get a someone from Norway drunk,
mhm.
they start speaking Danish because they're slurring all their words
I
and, yeah,
That's funny you say that. I have the same impression. Like when I hear Danish, I say
mm,
like it sounds to me like a drunk farmer
yeah.
kind of
I
thing.
mean,
Like
that
a
is
very
most of the country.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, Danish people. You're all wonderful.
I'm actually gonna have a couple of Danish, game developers on soon, so we'll talk shit about Holland,
All right.
once we
Please do.
yeah, and I just think that it was lucky for me to get exposed to all that stuff because I grew up in, Alabama, and there was just no the most I was gonna learn is maybe Spanish, like, so
Mhm.
working on farms and stuff like that, you're gonna pick up a little bit of Spanish, but
That's Yeah, that's pretty awesome, man.
yeah,
Very cool.
I grew to appreciate the fact that, this is not the only country in the world, and this is not the only language that gets spoken and all that,
Yeah.
but but as opposed to, my uncle lives in Switzerland, and just years of learning French and German Swiss, and all that stuff is like, very
Oh, wow. German
wildly different.
Swiss. There's another crazy language.
Yeah, or Swiss German, however you're supposed to
Swiss
say it. But
German.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if you're like really good at German, Switzerland's like, okay, whole new ball game here. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Um, do you feel like learning about all these different cultures and seeing all these different places has influenced your game design principles or just some of the ideas that you
Mm.
had for making a game?
That would probably be a stretch to claim that.
Okay.
Um, it does feel quite separate. How my game design has been influenced. Definitely because the games I played, and I do think I would have played. It's likely that I would have played those games even if I had stuck in Holland for the rest of my life. So I don't think so.
Do you feel
Certainly,
any
I mean, what has influenced me, I mean, indirectly, is making a game like this and starting a company. That's definitely influenced by me living in the United States. I think if I was stuck in Holland for the rest of my life, I would have not been so quote unquote adventurous.
Mhm.
I live in San Francisco, and the idea is like, go make a startup. It's like around every corner kind of thing. And at some point, you go and it's like, maybe I should do a startup kind of thing, or it's very infectious over here. I've not been very commercially minded person for most of my life. Like one of my first big game projects, the Cube engine, that was entirely open source and free. And only later it's like, maybe could have charged money for this. I don't know. But it was not even on my mind when I was living in Europe because I was doing other things. It's like, um, but yeah, living here, it's like, maybe the world needs this. I'm just going to build this and it's going to be awesome. So yeah, that sense I've been influenced very much by the United States, will say.
it's in general much easier to start a business in the States.
Oh, for sure.
Society
Yeah.
rewards you for doing that as opposed to like Ge Germany is, there's more laws in Germany than there are, like, in any other all the other countries in the world combined, basically, but, you start a business, "I wanna make a video game company." Cool. I also wanna sell merchandise. New business. Get a license for that. Like, great, okay, and then, well, we wanna do the new thing, more fees, and it could be very compounding. I have a really close friend who lives in Holland, as a matter of fact,
Hmm.
who we were gonna go into business together, and we still are, but the decision came down to basically, are you gonna start the business there or I'm gonna start the business here? And then even after he started the business there, it became so difficult that we were like, "You know what? Let's just have an LLC. I'll run it here, and then it'll be much easier for you to just do work as a contractor than it
Hmm.
will be for us to go through all the hoops and jumps to actually get this thing off the ground on that side of the world." Which is, I think there's a big shift in general where in the States right now, we almost got to a point where we were starting to think like, "Man, it's getting hard to run a business again." Like, we were
Hmm.
getting more and more like the European model, and, I think a lot of people don't want that, and there's pros and cons to both. You definitely want some sort of regulation because you can't have people just doing whatever they want. Unchecked capitalism has its faults. We certainly found that out in the States the hard way. But what's been your experience? I feel like there's such a strong culture of that, especially in San Francisco. I mean, there's so many companies,
Yeah,
especially tech companies.
it's quite a contrast. I never had an officially a company in Europe, but I
Mhm.
was part of Crytek for a while, and I could see just like at some point there was this thing that you had to have. Like Crytek was growing, and you had to have this internal group of employees or some kind of employee board or whatever that would help decide on things. And I decided I was going to be part of that. And as part of that, I looked at some German laws around like how you can fire someone or not or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, this stuff is so crazy complex. In
Mm.
that case, it was in our advantage because we could help people from not getting fired, basically. Um, that was definitely very difficult. I yeah. The funny thing is that I moved to San Francisco not because I wanted to make a startup, but because I just really liked the place. And so that was kind of like coincidence. But yeah, now that I'm doing a startup, and it's like a lot of people that are doing startup, like they're all right here. I I meet anyone and they look on our LinkedIn or whatever, and it says like, "Hey, San Francisco, you want to go grab coffee?" And that definitely is a super unfair advantage that I'm not noticing. So I don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, there's definitely the one hard part about running a business in the United States that I'm noticing is that every time I hire someone in a different state, that state has different different laws that I have to follow, and that is definitely a bit of work.
Are
But
you employing people across state boundaries, or are you contracting
yes,
them? Yeah, okay,
I
I
have
can see
both
where that would.
employees and contractors depending on what how much they're doing for the company. But
Yeah,
yeah, but
that makes
nowadays
sense.
there's a solution for everything. So there's startups that help you do payroll and other conforming stuff for your startup in different states. So, and you use that, but they're not all that great necessarily.
Just in general, dealing with, the taxes, the different state taxes across the borders,
Hmm.
and then you as the employer having to deal with that. This is actually pretty interesting to me. Like, this is in the Keep itself is a business, and we
Hmm.
we generally just have contractors because we're basically trying to avoid that becoming a problem. And the system sort of, it kind of rewards both sides of the coin. And in one hand, it's like if you're an employer, you're paying basically half of the employee's taxes, and
Hmm.
certain benefits are, expected and all that. And that's great. But then there's the other option to just pay people more and allow them to choose for themselves how to best deal with that. So if you're a 1099 contractor working for a company in California, but you live in New Mexico,
Hmm.
you just ask for the money you need in order to cover those expenses yourself instead of the company doing it. And I think that sometimes that could be taking advantage of people, and I've
Yeah.
definitely been on the wrong side of that deal. Don't get me wrong, but if you're a good employer, you'll kind of like know, yeah, I need to pay this person, equitably such that they can take into consideration their health
Hmm.
insurance, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen
yeah,
that. In fact, I've had situations with people where, like, for example, abroad, for the longest time, I could only get people on contract, and then I had the opportunity to be able to employ people there through an intermediary. And I asked the people there, it's like, hey, do you want to be, have a fixed salary, or you want to continue on contract? And some of them actually, they chose like, I want to continue on contract because I already am able to do, my own health insurance and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's just better money for me.
Right.
And so that's cool. But the problem is, of course, that like, again, depending on the state, if you employ someone for a certain amount of hours on contract or whatever, then potentially you're liable for misclassifying them and stuff like that. So you have to be super careful with that.
For sure.
Um,
That's where
so
a good
that,
CPA comes in. Like, you really gotta have a
well,
good one.
yeah, that's the thing though. If you have a small company like mine, then initially you just end up doing absolutely everything yourself.
Right.
So I've learned a lot about payroll and state rules and all these things that I never wanted to know. But, at least initially it's kind of interesting, being a person that has mostly spent my entire life doing programming and of course game design and adjacent and even level design and other things, but all these kind of business tasks of, HR, payroll, marketing, business development, and all these kind of facets of running a business. I'm kind of new to all that stuff, but it's after having programmed for, gosh, I guess 40 years at this point or something.
Mhm.
It's kind of nice to have some new problems to be to be busy with, and certainly, the general problem: how do you hire and keep and maintain a good team of people? Man, that's definitely a job in and of itself. It's definitely both very interesting and a lot of hard work.
I actually admire your willingness to do the absolutely everything route because
Hmm.
I kind of purposefully structured myself such that I would not be in that position, which
Okay.
involved basically taking things a lot slower than I think a lot of startups would.
Mm,
So, and there's pros and cons to everything. I was in a situation where it was like, first of all, I was in the Air Force for 6 years,
hmm.
and then immediately like walking into the world of like, oh, I need to like be a regular person who doesn't have someone to tell me every little detail of everything all the time. So that was a transition on its own. And then having the business in place, I was then going to uproot my life and go to Europe for a few years and leave and like still run an American business remotely. So I
Hmm.
had to have like there's no chance I'm doing everything. I gotta have a CPA, and a registered agent and all that kind of
Okay.
stuff. So I I basically put the business, at the registered agent so that I could, so it could legally still be there without me being a resident of the state that it was in. And that was I guess,
That is
I learned
definitely
a
more
lot too.
convenient. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
looked at that, but see, so far at least, uh, the CPA, they're very expensive, and I need to tell them a lot of stuff just to get them to do the thing that I want to be saving time on. And it's like it's almost sometimes like, okay, I'm just going to quickly do it myself. And
Um
I don't know.
Delegation and project management is a skill all in its own.
I know I still need to be better at that, but
Yeah.
I think once and if the company grows, then they maybe have a space for like a dedicated business person or whatever. That would be great, but we're not at that size yet.
Yeah. No, you can always outsource it too. You
Mm,
could contract a solid project manager, marketing, that kind of stuff. It all comes into play.
yeah,
You seem to be doing well enough, as it is, and I think that's awesome. And hopefully the game generates enough revenue where like I can hire whatever I need.
that
And
is the
on down the road.
plan.
Yeah. Do you have like kind of expectations of such that like you maybe year one what Voxile should sell to meet your goals?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, you know, the market generally is so crazy right now that it's really hard to have general expectations. There's so many games, there's so much stuff going on. Uh, as you know, the market is in an interesting turmoil that affects things. Um, it's weird because I have a game that I have a confidence in that at least if we keep pushing it in the right direction, that this is a lot of potential to be fairly big in all sorts of ways. I have no doubt this can be a large successful game. Um, how long does it take us to get it to like that kind of polished level and that content level before gamers will agree that indeed that they should all be I, that's also hard, right? We're at the current state of the game where we're confident we can go into early access. We have a lot of content. Sorry, it's a lot of fun to play, but there's definitely like lots more that we want to do. What does that translate to in terms of commercial success? Um, again, I feel like this could be very successful. Then again, there are so many stories of games releasing on Steam, and for whatever reason, they're not quite there yet,
Mhm.
and they have like abysmal sales or whatever. So those are kind of like the extreme points. I don't exclude, that it can go one way or the other. Um, I do feel that like now that we're kind of doing a bunch of marketing activities for the run up to early access, I'm just noticing how hard that aspect is. It's just really it seems that like whenever we do reach gamers, they're very quick to go, "Ooh, what's that?" and then be very interested and wishlist it. We've noticed that that from the percentage of people that we reach and then it then goes out and wishlists it is very, very high compared to other game. So that's would be great, right? It sounds like, okay, you got a game that's attractive and people want it, but just getting to the point where you reach those people, that is not a given. Um, something like you can wait till the game goes viral or whatever, or some huge streamer picks it up and then suddenly the floodgates are open.
Right.
That would be great. But then you're just waiting for that. If you just want to push that forward yourself, you actually don't have it's not that easy to push that. I mean, yeah, we're posting stuff on socials and we're doing all the things um but yeah, that marketing aspect is so how do you reach the gamer so that they can see is like, huh, is this something I'm interested in? Do I want to wish list this and potentially buy it in the future? That is actually the hard part. And and depending on how well we do with that in the near future, we're gonna get, part of that range of possible outcomes. And that's quite a wide spread of possible outcomes, all the way from, being the next Pal World to, some game that sits in a corner of Steam and no one sees it. All the way in that spectrum, that's all within the realm of possibilities. I hope it's
It's
somewhere in between. I'm not expecting a Pal World success necessarily, or at least not straight away. Um, but you just really don't know. And yeah, there's a certain number of sales per month that I have in mind that if we get that, we can support the current team basically. So that would be a very nice place to get to, right? Because that means we're long term steady, and then depending on how those sales develop, you can either grow the team or keep the team steady or whatever. The worst thing would be to have to shrink the team if sales are keeping lackluster for like a long time or something like that. So
uh,
that's what I'm looking at, but really, it's at this point, I will not be able to say much of anything. Like after early access, when we got the initial bump of sales from that, we'll know much more in terms of what trajectory we're on.
I think that's great, and, the early access model is solid because you can have revenue coming in and continue to build out, and you'll have people playing it
Yeah.
that will also, like, organically share it with other people, and that's a huge factor in the world of social media and all that is that you'll have content creators saying, like, "This is what I think of it so far," etcetera, and all that kinda thing, that
Yeah.
in general, I find with a indie develop I mean, obviously, you have, like, real AAA experience having worked on Far Cry, and, I think I even saw you were credited in, Borderlands too.
Yeah.
Well,
Borderlands
yeah,
1 and 2. Yeah.
very cool, yeah.
And SimCity, I even worked on. So the latest SimCity, which wasn't that great of a game, but I worked on it. All right.
But you've seen the machine, in its full-fledged form, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely know what it looks like to have a large AAA machine going. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that I've learned from that I don't want to be doing with my company. So that's cool.
That was
But it's,
exactly my experience was getting close to that and being like, "I don't think I like that." But the experience of seeing how it works and taking the parts that you do like, deciding on
yeah,
the parts you don't like, I don't want my employees to be treated this way. I don't want my company to be
mhm.
represented this way, etcetera. Yeah, I love that.
It's definitely there's so much stuff that we're doing different. Uh, Certainly what you're saying with early access, I think we have the kind of game that is very suited for early access because a lot of people, a lot of game companies go into early access and it's like, yeah, we want feedback from the players, and that's usually bullshit. In our case, that is actually the thing because we're actively developing this thing. We want people to be doing crazy stuff like building their own worlds and whatnot. So we need to be super interacting with the people that are actually playing our game. And it's also for the team is like we've been working so long, like almost 3 years now, in private mostly. And it's like getting some feedback on what um, players actually like and what they're craving more of is going to be highly motivating for us to push those aspects further. So I'm very much looking forward to it. The downside is, I think, given the current wisdom of when you're supposed to go in early access, is kind of like, oh, you're supposed to only go in early access when essentially your game is finished. And that's what a lot of game companies doing are right now. We're not necessarily doing that. We're going to early access a little bit earlier, exactly because we do want to, work with our customers basically. But well, hopefully our customers will appreciate that and see how that goes.
So I find with indies that don't have, say, the experience of having worked in the games industry as a whole,
Hmm.
they struggle with making decisions like you were talking about just going into early access for no apparent reason. It's or
Hmm.
not for the reason that they say they are, and it's more often than not, I have seen people that kind of just do what seems to be the trend without thinking about what it really means to do that. So if you and also just like you got to be transparent, I think, with your audience. Like if you say we're going into early access, this is what the game is going to be, and the reason why we're going into early access is because we need funding and we don't want to work with the publisher.
Hmm.
That's fine as long as everybody understands that's what the deal is. But
Yep.
for a game like this, where in which you are going to have people testing out the editors, they're going to be giving feedback on like, I like this mechanic, I don't like that mechanic. I wish you could do this or that is going to make your game a better game because that's the nature of the game is that the community is going to be largely the people who are making content at a
Yep.
certain point. And I think
And we
that's
have a
really, really smart.
yeah. We have a game also that is more open ended, right? There's lots
Mm.
of different kind of gameplay possible. It would be different if you had like a super story driven game, and it's like, the game designer is the all knowing person, and they have this vision and needs to be executed exactly to a T. And then the gamer showing up and is like, yeah, we'd like it to be like a little bit more this or that. It's like, oh, it wouldn't work. But in our case, I already know from early, like I said, like our designers have taken our game like very much in a like very questy kind of direction kind of thing. And some early testers are going like, I like this game, but I want more of that kind of open-ended, sandboxy, survival, do whatever the hell you want kind of experience, particularly in co-op mode where you play with your friends. And I'm like, okay, point taken. We're likely going to be a big focus point, post EA to enable more those kind of gameplay styles. Because not only were we planning it, but it's clear that people are wanting that from our game. As an
Yeah.
example.
One of the best pieces of business advice I've ever been given was that more companies die of indigestion than they do of starvation. And we're, we're talking earlier about how, like I went the go very, very slow route.
Hmm.
And, basically because I was like, I need to attain this skill or reach this goal before I even start talking about that next thing. Whereas the tendency, especially in Silicon Valley, is to start a company, try to do everything all at once, and then get to a point where you actually have paying customers and you can't meet the needs of their service. And I think in games, early access is a good way of like you'll kind of know what people's expectations are before you fully launch the game. Like you'll know what they want, what they see as like this would be the completed version of it. Of course, you have that compared to your own vision as well. It's gonna be really cool. But going back to like mistakes that I see indies make, mistakes, whatever, just common. Maybe you call it like just the leveling up system of figuring out how it works. But you ever heard of the SMART goals model? Like
Smart goals model.
yeah,
No, that does not ring a bell.
it's just a good old fashioned acronym, but it's like making your goals specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time based. So that's
Mm,
the SMART. But I find that some people will get into making games and not have that laid out already. Like you basically need to have each of those boxes checked off before you can set an effective goal because otherwise you
mm.
don't know what to measure yourself up against, right? You need to be
I
able to specifically say, this is what the goal is. this is when we're gonna attain it, or when we plan to attain it at least. Does it actually benefit my overall product? And all of those factors come into play. So I like to think in that regard. Whereas I didn't when I first started doing video game development. I really just kinda had this open-ended idea, like, we're gonna make an FPS in the Doom engine, and it'll have, I don't know, some levels and all that kinda stuff. See what you can come up with. And leading a team, very quickly I found out that the hardest part of leading a team is getting them to know what their goal is. What's my
Mhm.
motivation like an actor on stage?
Yeah. Yeah, that is certainly super important if, you actually wanna have business success as opposed to just having a fun project
Mm,
that you're working on. We're certainly doing pretty okay along most of those, since we have strong goals, we know how to get there, we know why we want them and what we wanna achieve with them, and to some extent, I have numbers that I know I wanna achieve. That said, I would say one aspect of our company that kind of goes against that grain is that we are very, very incremental company, I would like to call it,
right.
which means that like most AAA companies, once you get out of like their early prototypes, is like you get big ass spreadsheets of, all the art assets going to be produced and all the enemies that we're going to have with all their hit points and everything like that.
Mhm.
It's like we just totally, utterly do not work like that. Like all our content, our art, our monsters, weapons, worlds, gameplay features, they all just kind of come online whenever, however. As the programming team is really working on just like, hey, what is the best thing that we can now do to make the game better? And we just do that. And then we look at the next thing. So it's very much for, having milestones. Like we gotta have exactly this list of features done in 3 months from now. Well, that's cool, but it's not going to work out that way. So in that sense, that's one part we're doing very differently. A huge advantage of that is that our game is always in a playable state. It's always in a good state, pretty much always. Whereas these AAA games, I've worked on AAA. I'm thinking of, for example, of of when we're working on Far Cry, and right up until months before the game was supposed to launch, like pretty much every world was like in a state of disarray where it wasn't really playable or really fun. That really came together at the end. Uh, Luckily, pretty rapidly. Like the game ended up being very good, but it took an enormous amount of doing and sleepless nights by certain people to kind of bring it all together at the end. And until that moment, like the first 2 years of its development, it was just like random code features and assets were being built, but they didn't form a coherent whole in any kind of way. And I remember working on that and testing, and it's just like everything felt broken and unfinished kind of thing for pretty much my entire time there, until right at the end. Whereas our game has, you know, even 2 years ago, you could run around and shoot things and have some fun, and it's a lot better now, but it's not substantially changed in the sense that there's always a game there basically. And, every build we make, there's a whole bunch of new cool stuff in there, but it's constantly improving. Um, but the downside of that is that like, you know, I would not be able to tell you right now exactly what in 3 months, in 6 months or whatever, how the game will look different. I don't have a clear picture of that. But
Yeah.
working so far for us, so and that's part of the fun of doing something different, just kind of experimenting. Does this style of working work? Well, certainly, as a programmer, I've always worked very incrementally, but that's potentially different. Like, can I have this working style? Does it work for my content people as well? And yeah, so far it does. I think we've even structured the editor such that like it's very easy to kind of refactor your world, like what you do in code. Here you want to just restructure things, move some stuff around, and have a slightly the world play a little bit differently, rather than feeling that you have to kind of rebuild the world or whatever. Um, Famously, if you look back at the old editors from like Doom and Quake days,
Mhm.
certainly Doom, if you wanted to shift like a bunch of rooms to like a different position and level, that depending on the editor you were using, that was not so easy. And those kind of actions are definitely very, very easy in our game because I want designers to just be able to decide at any moment, like, okay, players said that that area is too hard. I need to move some stuff around to make it better. And that kind of work to be relatively easy to do. So that's kind of what a lot of our company's processes are structured around, I would say.
Did do mention specifically, like, not having a real room over room. You have to be very smart with,
Mm,
like, basically placing teleporters such that the player gets the experience of that, or maybe even being really smart and, like, if you're clever, creating the visual that exists even though it doesn't. Um,
yeah, I
and
remember the
al
tricks.
so we kinda, like, brushed over this, but there's sort of a a theoretical order of operations for designing a game that where it makes sense all the way through, iteratively,
Mhm,
like you said, as opposed to having a bunch of shit and then having to make it all work at the very end.
mhm,
That definitely tends to happen. I've seen with, like, teams that are not the most experienced making a really big project for the first time. So I've seen situations where, like, you're trying to make a like an immersive sim, and you will be years into the development and there's really no game to play. Like, well, what have you done? I'm like, well, we made a bunch of art. We've made, some basic mechanics. Here's a whole world worth of levels, but there's no game here. And
mhm,
that is super frustrating. So when it comes to, dealing with investors, or in your case with players who are in a way also your investors because they're funding it to a degree,
mhm,
you sort of want to be, as you said, always in a state where it can be playable, because that's how you communicate. This is the progress we've made.
mhm.
This is what we've done this month. This is what we've done this quarter, this year, whatever. Because I have seen games get straight up just axed because not because they weren't going to be a great game, but because there was nothing there to test. There's no way to evaluate
Yeah,
what
and
has
then
been
what you
delivered.
and that's a very important point because
Mhm,
unless you've done this before, you might underestimate that getting from a point where you have a game that seems playable, but it's not fun and there's clearly stuff missing, to
mhm,
make that jump to a game which is now fun is so much more impossible than people think it is. It's like I like the big problem is that the space of possible kind of gameplay designs is like gigantic. It's super multidimensional. It's gigantic. And most of the time where you're in a particular point, your game is a particular point, it's like you're in the fog. It's like you don't know how to get from one point of gameplay style to another because there's so many variables that you'd have to change. So you are with a game where it's playable, maybe there's something there, but it just it's really clearly not fun enough kind of thing. And then you don't know how to get the fun and you're basically screwed. And that happens to a lot of games. Um and yeah, for our game, you know, I think the cool thing is like you can play it and then there's a certain level of fun there. And you can have kind of the confident like it's gonna be at least this fun that you're seeing right now. And there's clearly lots of avenues to make it, even better. So you're on a good trajectory that does not have these impossible jumps uh, in it. And yeah, we've been kind of on a trajectory for a while now, and the fun is only growing. So, but yeah, it's super hard if you don't have a plan for that and you haven't tested that, then good luck.
Order of operations aside, what are some of
Mhm.
the other things, like habits of working in AAA versus working, indie with your own company? Like, what are some of the takeaways? Like, do this, don't do that, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly, the amount of planning that we just talked about. I
Right.
think the other big thing is like how these companies deal with their employees. Most AAA companies are extremely regimented, and you feel if you're just a programmer or just a level designer or something like that. In most AAA companies, you don't feel a lot of agency to make the game go anywhere. And that is incredibly frustrating because I've myself been part of games on occasion where, you feel the ship is going in the wrong direction or the ship is even sinking. And you're just there and it's like, well, clearly everyone is stressed out and frustrated that the game is not going the right direction, but no one feels like they can fix it. And the people at the top, they're constantly saying that they're fixing it, but then they're not fixing it. And it's just such a crazy situation. Um, give you a random example. I remember Crytek that we had this producer, and he was doing something with like how the guns function, like very super fundamental stuff about a game, like how the gun feels and whatnot. And
Right.
there I'm just a programmer, but I play a lot of first person shooters, and I know what I like about gunplay, and I I sent an email out to a bunch of people like, hey, maybe we should do this. This will work better. And I got slapped down hard for not being a game designer. And it's like, what do you think, you little programmer? That you know how the guns are supposed to work? And I'm like, what the hell? Anyone can have a good idea of how the guns are supposed to work.
Right.
Uh,
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. Whatever happened to the good old days when computer role-playing games spent more time telling great stories than stressing you out with season passes and needless grinding? Call of Seregnar is our effort to bring back the best in RPGs. Play in the immersive world as two friends adventure into a murder mystery that lands them in the middle of a battle between gods. Head over to callofseregnar.com. That's call of SAREGNAR.com for more info. And be sure to wishlist on Steam.
so that's a big difference. I think big AAA companies. Um, a while ago, I thought it's like I'm only ever going to go back into AAA if I'm the guy at the top, because I will not be able to deal with, you know, being just executing stuff that doesn't appear to be working. And so, in my company, not saying everything is ideal, but I'm trying to hire people and then also set them on the way where basically, like, once they're inside the company, is like, okay, you are your own unit kind of thing. Like I said, the designers is like you are designing this world both visually, story wise, and also to some extent gameplay. Right? It's like I've made the gameplay that they can give their own twist on it, and it's like that is also like they may be able to discover like a balance in our gameplay that's even better is what I had in mind. And same with the programmers, like one of the main programmers I work with, which was a guy I used to work with at Google, and he's absolutely amazing programmer. And it's just so awesome that I don't need to tell him anything. He works on stuff. He makes decisions on what to work on because he's a total pro. What's the most effectful to work on? When he implements it, I usually don't check his code. When I do look at his code, I'm like, yep, that's exactly how I would have implemented it. And when there's any kind of design associated with it, he does a good job. And that's totally a game changer. Like having someone like that on your team is like I don't have necessarily have time to. If he was more junior, I would not be able to manage him like all the time, kind of thing. So, and basically having a team where everyone just does good stuff and they push things forward themselves. I'm not sure that can work with like a 200 people team where everyone just kind of does their own thing. I mean, Valve is famously a company that kind of tries that approach. We'll have to see if we grow, if that's maintainable. We have some structure now. We actually have a lead designer with another person who's very good at just pushing things forward that kind of manages like our design team.
Mhm.
So we have some hierarchy in the company already, kind of thing. And presumably, if you grow, you need more of that. But I think the challenge is to not let that hierarchy become something where the people at the bottom of the hierarchy feel like they don't have any effect on where the ship is going, and the ship is going the wrong direction. That their voices are being ignored because the person at the top thinks they're so smart. Um, and I think that's a huge difference. But I have easy talking because I have not led a 200 people company yet. So maybe I'll fail just as hard as these other people will. We'll see if we get there.
Business structure is a huge thing, and
Mhm.
the size of the company absolutely makes a huge difference. Like Valve having the famously flat structure of like
Mhm.
everyone sitting around a table and everyone gets an equal say, and we all, there's no matter that's too small to be discussed, and all that makes sense. If you have like 12 people,
Mhm.
a manageable group of people, and I find that as you grow and you get bigger, I've had this experience very directly. I mean, you've got to not necessarily like a manager should have a manageable amount of people, that work with them, such that it's a more or less representative democracy.
Mhm.
Because the last thing you want is to have a stand-up meeting with 60 people, 40 of them don't need to be there, it doesn't even apply to them. The If it's a 3-hour long meeting, only 5 minutes of them talking, and then they just otherwise are muted, and, "Yeah, I don't this doesn't matter to me," etcetera, and all of that stuff. But if you can kind of, like, structure it so that your managers of each team, they
Mhm.
know what everyone's interests are, they can represent that well, communicate that up the chain, in a hierarchy sense, that's really great. And also, I mean, the culture of the leader themselves, like, or the, maybe it's oligarchical, but the group of
Mhm.
people at the top, if they're a receptive person, who's open to ideas. And then
Mhm.
you also have to have that balance of what to say no to, not necessarily because it's a shitty idea, but just because we have to ship a product, and if we keep, feature creep is the term everyone uses. If we keep adding more new ideas or every little thing, if everything has to
Mhm.
be discussed, we'll never get to the goal. Um, I think coming from the military culture into the game design culture was a enormous shock for me. I mean, I went
Oh, yeah.
completely 180 degrees from 100% structure, and if you're at the bottom, shut the fuck up and don't ask about it,
Mhm.
to, every single person feels that they have a say, and then sort of, like I said, like finding that middle ground where it works for everyone. Because the last thing you want to do is discourage someone to the point where they no longer want to work on the project, especially if they're a good hand. Um,
Yeah. That's a super, super hard balance. Because yeah, you don't have the meeting with the 40 people, but those 40 people need to have a path
right.
that they feel they're doing meaningful work and their voices being heard. And yeah, you can't always do everything. And certainly, as the people working with me will tell you, is like this whole project has a strong amount of my vision in there, not just game design, but also like, world structure, world building, and also even on the technical side. And like to throw in at this point that, our engine is built on a custom programming language of my making. So that you kind of know just exactly how insane I am. So there's definitely a lot of strong vision.
Mhm.
But you got to just be aware of like when something is, when someone else has a better idea. And I think egos get in the way of these larger companies. I've seen so many examples of these people at the top that feel they have to push things through their way just because otherwise what's their value? And yeah, then you're just being I I definitely just want to make a game that a lot of players really really, really enjoy. And if all my players are saying like this sucks, then like what are you doing by just holding strong to it? Um, but there are limits. For example, we've sometimes had the discussion. Just give you a random example. I do have strong ideas about the kind of game like my game design bias is towards games. I would just call it with a lot of agency. So where the player feels kind of very much in control. They feel they can do a lot of things. Um, As opposed to, say, games where the gameplay systems force the player to, you can't go out of the bounds of the current area, which is very famous, invisible walls and all that. Um, you don't gain as much power from killing enemies or whatever. There's bounds on like how much you can upgrade your character and all these things that are meant to keep the player like in a particular spot so it becomes easier to balance. Like my philosophy is more like let players go wild. One discussion, for example, we very often have in our design team is that some of the designers go and they're like, I'm having a hard time because, the player is supposed to go through like these things and then unlock a door there and then do this quest and then, finally get to that room where they get the reward. But, I'm having a hard time because if a player really wants to, they can use the jackhammer, which is our destroyer tool kind of thing. And they could just dig around that locked door and get in the room that way. And again, it's like, how do we avoid that? And they essentially are saying is like, I want you to stop it being possible from the players to destroy the world. And I'm going like, no, why are we doing that? If a player wants to feel clever that they've circumvented a part of like the quest requirements by digging around something, that's not a broken game. That's a game where players can be creative and choose their own path. And the quests are only there really to give the players some kind of structure if they want it. They're not like some kind of holy requirement that every part of the quest has to be fulfilled exactly in the way that the designer envisioned it, right? So as an example of like, my general design philosophy. So if people in a company come around and is like, the games I play, I really like it if the world was not destroyable and, if the player could not attain strong weapons by their own motivation that well, or some kind of way to then I would say is like, okay, sorry, that's nice, but really this goes against the grain of it. And that's where I have to say no. But there's plenty of other examples where it's not strong. That's strongly part of the vision, and you just make the game better. Um, and a very simple example of that is that like originally I had designed all the items in the world to have a weight, so that your inventory had like weight limits, and that's how you do things. And it turned out to be very opaque. It turned out to be very hard to manage for players. Um, in terms of like figuring out like when they were overcumbered and they needed to drop items, and that was just not a really fun gameplay mechanic. And then our lead designer made a strong case for switching it to like a slot-based approach. So, you can't carry more when your slots are full, but you don't particularly care like about the weight of the things that are in the slots.
Right.
And that made the game just so much more fun because you just very visually clearly can see exactly, what your limitations are. Turned out to be a better design. Even though personally I kind of like the weight design more, but I had to admit, it's like, yeah, okay, we're going to make the game better for most players by switching this up, and we switched it up, and now the game's better. You know,
Yeah.
so
There's this sort of a like age old rule amongst game developers, like to when you're doing your marketing, like don't talk about inventory management, which I think is dumb. But so for instance, I think when you're making something and the intention is for it to be fun,
mhm,
ideally, if you're dealing with something like inventory management, make that fun. So as you said, it's not very fun to think about the weight of the object, but it may be fun to just kind of like think about like, okay, well, this is the number of slots I have.
mhm,
A great example was Resident Evil 4 and well, Resident Evil in general, and also there's another game that's sort of like doing a nice take on that that's coming out hopefully soon called Gloomwood. But the idea that you have a briefcase that's this size and the the number of slots in that briefcase that your object takes place, you're sort of playing this little Tetris game of
mm,
fitting stuff in there. So like maybe this rifle will fit in the case, but you have to turn everything sideways or whatever to fit it in there. And that sort of gamifies and also makes it realistic what you could carry.
mhm,
And making one of these challenges a game in and of itself, that's cool. I like that sort of way of thinking about
yeah,
it. But your way of doing it is perfectly valid too, and also just being able to like iteratively, like you pick up a backpack, or you get a bag or a set, the RPG, sack of holding, uh, way of doing things, the
yeah.
Mary
You
Poppins bag.
definitely, you
Yeah,
definitely have a way to expand your slots in many,
yeah,
many different ways. So yeah.
yeah. I am curious what your marketing goals have been. I know you said you're doing. I mean, obviously, right now you're making podcast appearance, at least on this
Mhm.
one. Do you have other shows that you're going to be part of, or?
I haven't got that much lined up. I recently did do a kind of an interview with that someone has a Minecraft related channel, and it's very cool. He reviews games, but then he also has like interviews with like the developers interspersed in it, and I thought that was a really cool format. I'm definitely looking to do more of those, and get my team involved, but they tend to be more shy than I am. I have no shame.
Oh,
Um, did you set marketing goals? I guess. I mean, in the end, we have goals to take early access and build that up to, a level of success for the game where we can support the team is the overarching goal, of course, of
yeah,
anything in most game companies. So, and how to best achieve that is to make early access into a success. That still is a thing that, for most people, it's all about the wish lists, right? So, because the wish lists all get to hear that the game launches, and that really helps push it forward. And also, the Steam algorithm is such that the more those people come in, the Steam is like, oh, this is a popular game, and it shows it to everyone else as well. So you really depend on those wish lists, or like even Steam gamers that have not wishlisted it yet, for those to be able to see it and potentially get interested and buy it, or then wishlisted and buy it later. That's cool too. Um, So yeah, most of the marketing is really is geared towards that, to get people to see the Steam page, to see what kind of game we are, and then hopefully be interested and then wishlist it. That's the big thing. I think for us, the other big thing is just to get people into the community. Um, Again, with the editor, I think if we get early on, a lot of people are building worlds. Uh, that is super cool because that attracts again other people, and it's kind of like a thing where players and people that create stuff in the game uh, get some kind of symbiotic relationship, if you will. Um, that's another big thing that we want to build up
Yeah.
through marketing and socials and whatnot.
I think the
Um,
incentive of someone who has created something to then, say like, "Hey, look at this level that I created in
yeah,
this game,"
good
is a
point.
huge deal too. Um,
Yeah, they will want exposure for their world as well, so they
yeah,
become kind of people that help with that. For sure.
yeah. I
But
found,
I'm realizing how new I am to marketing. So um,
yeah,
we'll have to see how that all works.
I've found that a lot of people, sort of bank everything on the Steam algorithm, and I try to encourage folks to, of course, that's important, but also, like, reaching people w regardless of the Steam algorithm. Like, not
Yeah.
don't just depend on, like, them seeing it on their store page and magically deciding that of all the other 10,000 games they're gonna be exposed to today, this is the one. Like, making those personal connections, going to the conventions, handing out, flyers or business cards with your QR code that goes directly to your game site or your game store page, even better,
Hmm.
on there. Yeah, it just like stuff like this. Like you and I are having a conversation. We may not reach that many people, but the people who do hear it are gonna like hopefully have like a kind of
Oh
a
yeah.
personal connection. They're like, "Oh, I like this guy. I want to see what he makes," as opposed to just does the game stand all on its own, which is good too. A lot of especially programmers tend to sort of think that it should stand on its own. It should be
Mm,
just put it out there like I built the statue of David, and people should just flock around it. And I'm like. I mean, there's no harm in saying like, "Hey, did you hear there's a statue over there? Maybe you should go look at
yep.
it." You know,
And it
really nice
seems
statue.
not scalable to personally be, talking to gamers or whatever, but
Mhm.
these people that become your kind of your super fans, if you will,
Yeah,
and these people have so much more value than, random person playing it that doesn't care so much because like you say, it's like, yeah, they'll be making stuff, they'll be talking to their friends, and then there's a whole bunch of good stuff. Um, that said, you just realize just how crazy big Steam is. The reason people go for this wish list stuff is just when you see other games and they have like some kind of a success, like that 90% of their sales and their traffic came all from inside Steam. They had big streamers play their game or whatever, and that was a huge thing for them. But that's almost more like a seed of the success of these games. Like once they take off, it's entirely inside Steam, which is just kind of crazy. So want to have a go at like that kind of level of success. You
yeah.
gotta treat Steam seriously, I'm afraid. But there's no reason why you can't do both. I mean, we're very small still at this moment, so we have all the bandwidth in the world to engage with the smaller community directly, and we will continue to do so. While you're also trying to, optimize for Steam.
I would posit that the all of the traffic coming from Steam is a chicken and the egg scenario,
Hmm.
because a lot of the games that if you're really really paying close attention on the marketing side that do have that kind of traffic, the reason why they have that kind of traffic is because they built a strong community that
Right.
everyone wishlisted, lots of people are buying it, and then the algorithm, "Oh, this is a profitable product. Let's put that in front of more people." And then you start to get those people that are like, "Oh, this is on the state, on the page." And they're seeing it all the time. There's the old marketing rule of sevens, plus or minus two. How many times have you seen this before you actually pay attention to the fact that it
Mm.
exists or even
Yep.
notice it? And of course, exposure is huge. Just getting your logo, your brand, an image of your game in front of people in different contexts. It takes a lot of times before most folks that aren't initially, gravitated towards it notice it. The door to door vacuum cleaner salesman, right? if he knocked on my door 7 times, I might be just so tired of him asking that I'm like, "Yeah, you know what? Come in and do the demo." I'll
It's
pay
like
pay
your
200.
your vacuum must be really special that you're wanting to come 7 times. Now I wanna see just how well it sucks.
And not even just, an advertisement, but just 7 different people told you about it. You've heard like,
Mhm.
I heard of Voxile, okay, cool, whatever. I've got a lot of games on my radar. The next week, man, I'm playing Voxile. I'm like, "Fuck, I think I heard of that before."
Yep.
The third week, 10 people I know are in a Discord server playing Voxile. The
It's
4th week, somebody's like, "Oh, I made a level for Voxile." And I'm like, "All right, I gotta start paying attention." It seems like a lot of people are, that I trust are engaged in this and, oh, now there's a YouTube video. One of my favorite reviewers is doing that. Yeah. Oh, I go on Twitch. There's several people, and it just kind of iteratively
Oh, yeah.
comes to
I'm
the point where you've
definitely
strangled the person like a boa constrictor into paying attention to you.
will be doing all those things. It just
Mhm.
turns out doing all those things is not easy or
Takes
being able to
manpower.
get on those things. So,
Yeah.
we'll just keep hammering away at it and we'll get there.
It's, it's something that happens a lot, I've noticed in the podcast industry where, like, say someone's on a book tour
Mhm.
and, they'll be on, I don't know, the Joe Rogan Experience, and then I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And then you'll notice, like, oh, they're doing every major podcast all at once. And so it's
Mm,
like the next week, another like, "Oh, he's on Lex Friedman. Oh, he's on, Eric Weinstein. Oh, he's on," and then it's just, before long, you're like, it creates the illusion that, like, everyone's paying attention to this, but in fact, it's the
right.
marketing side of things is saying, "You need to reach all of these audiences and where they cross over because people are going to start recognizing your name." Because the first time that you see that in your feed, it's just
Mhm.
another name, and then you keep seeing the same name over and over and over again, you're like, "Oh, a lot of people are interested in this." But in fact, it's that they're smart about how they're playing their cards.
Uh, yeah,
Um
we have not been that structured or smart about it so far.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm totally going to be emailing Lex after this because I totally want to be on his podcast, and I think it would be
Mhm.
very helpful for Voxile to be on Lex Friedman. So
I
Joe
think that would
Rogan,
be
maybe
awesome.
we'll have to look.
Lex, his episode with John Carmack was inspiring. I was like,
Yeah, if
this is
John
awesome."
Carmack can be on there, then why not me? I mean, let's be honest. Come on.
I mean, if you could pull it off, let me know because I would also very much like to
I'm
talk to Lex
kidding.
Friedman. Um,
That'd be kind
I'll
of an
email him.
achievement.
I
Wow.
will go on his website and write out like, "Hey, I think you should have this guy." Like, I've done that to greater or lesser successes in different ways. I find it, for instance, John Carmack, very approachable guy. Like,
Hmm.
you would think it's impossible to get in touch with the great and powerful, legendary John Carmack, but his Twitter, at least, when I did this, wide open DMs,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
These
and
people
he'll
typically are.
responds, like, "Hey, thanks for the offer." In my case, he was like, "I'm not doing a lot of podcasts right now. After the Joe Rogan one, I promised Lex I would do it.
Hmm.
So I'm not taking any more offers until after I've done that." And then I think 3 years passed, and then he did Lex. So I'm thinking, I've got a window of time here before, maybe
Yeah,
he'll
build
just
that up. Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny,
But
I had that with Tim Sweeney, like, a long time ago, more than 20 years ago now or something like that.
mm,
He was posting that he was working on some programming language feature for Unreal Script or whatever, and I have a good amount of background in programming languages, and he was asking about something or was struggling with something, so I just emailed him and it's like, "Hey, if you tried this, maybe look at that." And immediately, like, half an hour later, got a reply back, huge wall of text about what he was all doing and stuff like that, and then, we've exchanged like a ton of emails ever since, mostly about programming language stuff. And that was just really just kind of funny. Like even back then he was already fairly famous, I guess. Only gotten worse since. But yeah, he didn't care. It's like, here's someone who wants to talk to me about that, and you just went for it. And that was super, super awesome.
all the folks that I've run across from like Epic Games, just really cool dudes. So Cliff Blazitsky, very cool
Hmm.
dude. Doesn't live too far from here actually. I'll probably just go knock on his door at
Oh
some
yeah.
point. But
Just
yeah,
just north of you, yeah.
yeah. But he's just very like personable and like
Hmm.
pretty down to earth considering he's like a multi-millionaire, and I think that's awesome. That's the kind of multi-millionaire I'd like to be. When
Yep.
he's just like, I'm just a
It
dude.
tells an enormous amount about someone's character. If you've achieved something and you don't want to talk to regular people anymore because you're above that now or something like that, that
Yeah.
tells you you're a huge jackass and vice versa.
For sure.
So
For sure.
good on them.
So as Voxile hits the market,
Mhm.
it's in early access. Do you have like maybe a list of outlets or content creators or whatever that you intend to reach out to, or is it going to be primarily organic?
Not personally. So, are working with a marketing slash socials person that is working all those kind of things out, and we use a small PR agency for like just regular, news outlets. Like for example, our coverage on IGN was through that. Um, but yeah, not really. I personally like it's pretty difficult because there's, for example, a lot of streamers that do like Minecraft content and they're kind of naturally attracted to what we're doing, but their audience really needs to know that our game really is not a Minecraft clone.
Right.
Um, so that kind of thing. And it's kind of like our game is very in between a lot of things, right? It has the look as if it's a Minecraft clone, which it isn't, and it has this blend of gameplay styles. There's a lot of shooter games out there, but they tend to be very serious and realistic shooters, whereas of course we're much more cartoony in some kind of way. Um, there's a lot of like, more cutie adventure games out there, but they tend to not have guns and monsters whose parts will fly off and expose skeletons
Mhm.
underneath. So it's almost like we're this weird blend where we don't really fit that easily in a very clear. Um, then again, potentially we can interest all those markets, but it's not that easy to find like a streamer that's like, oh, this is exactly the kind of streamer that. Um, but yeah, we're looking at that. If you have ideas, please send them my way. I would be
Oh, yeah,
very thankful. So
certainly down to help. It
yeah.
is my profession after all, so I'm always like, especially with people who are like, I'm already interested. I'm like, yeah, this is what I would do. Maybe these people I would talk to. I'll even go so far as just like go to a search engine and be like, tell me all the people who played these types of games, and like just give it like a
Mhm.
list, and then like this person has a community, blah blah, that kind of thing. They have 400,000 YouTube subscribers that are all interested in this particular topic, and I'm like,
Mm,
okay. And now I'll make a spreadsheet, and then I'll go and email a key to every single one of them, and be like, hey, I think you might like this, and that a large part of that is how it works behind the scenes.
yeah.
Um, I think there's a fine line when communicating to an audience what your game is and also deciding what to make, where in which it needs to be uh comparable to something that they're already familiar with enough that they understand what you're describing,
Mhm.
and also different enough that they actually want what you're selling, that they are not having their needs met by the thing that you're comparing it to. So
Yeah.
like if you were going to make I don't know, a game about shooting and building things that's an online massive multiplayer game where, there's a circle and it gets smaller and you're forcing combat to happen. There's
I've heard of
probably
those
another
games. Yeah.
game that
Yeah.
already offers that service for free.
Mhm.
Uh, so how am I gonna talk you into spending money on something that's probably not doing it the same thing exactly as well as that one is?
Mhm.
And it turns out that when you're coming up with a new idea, this is the first time anyone's ever seen this. The way to present that typically has to do with spending a fuck ton of money. And
Oops.
there are genres, uh,
That might be a problem.
yeah, there are genres where it's like, I think investors struggle with like they all see the trend and then they want to invest in that genre and they don't realize. I'll just use like MOBA as an example. If you want to
Mhm.
make a successful MOBA game or really esport of any kind, uh, you can't just say, "Here's a budget." You have this amount of time to develop it, put it out, and then stop supporting it if you don't get a return on investment. Turns out the way to make that happen is to continue to double down and
Oh,
double down. Like, so
yep.
Riot Games took forever to make a profit.
Mhm.
Once they did make a profit, it
It
was
was huge.
extremely profitable, but
Yeah.
it took a lot longer than I think most investors are used to. Their fiscal quarter is how they're
Yeah.
thinking. You
That is
uh,
definitely. That is definitely something, and that's not something that will be interesting for us. Like I said before, it's like I have that confidence we can get there. Question is like, how long does it take us to get there? And will we survive all of that?
Yeah,
I am certainly going to try, but yeah, that is definitely interesting.
I found that like a great example was Quake Champions. Exactly, but Bethesda is like we should do a. Well, first of all, we'll do a Quake game, but we're going to make it
Hmm.
more like other esports where it's they started off with a paid model and then they switched to like a season pass sort of thing with loot boxes and such, which was following a trend. Not that the game is in any way bad. I've played a lot of probably have more hours in Quake Champions than any other game that's not a
Oh wow, okay.
RPG. But then after a while, they're like, "This isn't making us any money," and I'm like, "Because you basically what you need to do, especially with esports, is invest a shitload of money in advertising and prize pools. Like you need to have tournaments, or else people aren't going to be interested." A big part of the bringing back Quake World in North America was me explaining to people like the reason why no one's playing in your tournaments is because there's no money at the end of the
Hmm.
line. But if you could raise enough money that it's worth someone who wouldn't otherwise do this time to stop playing what they're making money playing and play this, they'll
Hmm.
come play this. So you want your prize fighters, so to speak, to show up. We even did experiments on purpose. We would see like we would iteratively increase prize pools. This was more Quake Champion side than with
Hmm.
Quake World, but like we want to see how much money it the a prize needs to be for pros to like if we get pros to show up, so
Yep.
like Rafa being one of the greatest players in all
Hmm.
Quake history, right? He joined one of the tournaments that we put on, and then we knew that's how much money it's worth.
To get
That's
him,
how
yeah,
much it needs to be before these people, this group of folks, take interest. Um, in your
yeah,
case, that's not really applicable. But I mean, theoretically, I
yeah.
guess someone could make a PvP campaign or level or something like that in Voxile. But
That's the hard part. If you're like a smaller company like
mhm,
us, is
yeah,
like any kind of money available, we can port it into marketing, go big that way. But that same money can also be poured into, supporting the team for longer, actually making the game better. So, which of those is
mm,
gonna give better results in the long term? Certainly, I think the latter. Um, so it's a careful balance. You got to do some level of marketing for sure. And of course, organic can be cheap, but it sometimes doesn't reach people quite as much. So it's yeah, trying to figure that out.
yeah,
Hope that we'd get at some point in the position where we can have big ass competitions. That would be very, very nice.
yeah.
That's
I
certainly
mean,
suitable for our game. So
like competitions for people to make campaigns or levels that are like
yeah,
and if
well,
you win the
we're running one.
competition, yeah,
Yeah, we're doing one at the moment, but it's for fairly small, moderate amounts of prize money. But we're experimenting with it already because I think that will work wonderfully for our game. It's kind of natural thing for us to be doing. So,
yeah. I believe that in fact the designer of Quake Champions won a level design competition during the Quake Live timeframe,
oh
and
wow, okay,
ended up
I got started.
working for its software and such, and that's how I got into it.
Yep,
So
I
shout out to
was
Adam Pyle, love that guy.
hmm, nice. I was very active in the Quake level design community way back when, and I've seen a lot of friends from that era that are now, you know, lead designers in lots of game companies and things like that. It's
Right,
very awesome to see from the early beginnings where it's like some new guy and it's like, hey, I've made this little level. It's like, this guy's got some skills in terms of making aesthetically looking quick levels and
that's
you know.
how Tim Willits ended up at his software was
Oh
making
yeah, of
levels for
course.
Doom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He made a very strong ascent that way. Yeah.
So when you're hiring folks, sort of, what are the qualities that you look for in employees?
So yeah, that's interesting. I mean, um, kind of by necessity, we're a fully remote company. And that's not because I got some kind of philosophy that remote is better than office or something like that. But we don't even have the money nor the ability to have everyone in an office. So that's kind of kind of by necessity, but it does bring the ability to hire like across the world. And we have people in the United States, we have people in Europe. We've even at some point had someone in Japan. We have someone in New Zealand. So we're like kind of all over the place.
Mhm.
And that's cool because we have very kind of specific kind of skills that we're looking for. For example, we work exclusively with voxel artists, like people that have created voxel art before, as opposed to someone that's a good polygon artist, but has never done anything with voxels. It is really kind of like a very high, at least specialized skill. And some of the best people for those, like we have one guy in Germany. He actually he also worked on Teardown, for example, and he's just amazing. And yeah, then you got to go there. So we're very much indexing on using finding the best talent wherever it is, as opposed to just trying to get everyone in California or something like that. The other thing is like related to something I mentioned earlier is that we really need the people that are kind of self-driven and drive things forward by themselves. And that is because, again, we're working remote. I'm not sitting next to this person's desk and being able to easily tell him what to work on next kind of thing. So that is just kind of essential. And also, you're this small company. And also from the philosophy that I told you before, I think the game will turn out better if these people just take their own initiative and say, like, I want to build this. I've told my artists, like, because um, we don't have like this clear list of like what assets need to be made next. Very often it says like the artist in our company, they'll be in a chat with the level designer. The level designer going, like, I'm building this new house and I need a new style of set of pieces to be able to build this house in a particular kind of style, and then go make that. That's one way to do it. But I've always said to the artists, I'm like, look, as a voxel game, like if you're a level designer, you're always kind of browsing our voxel asset, like, hey, what's a cool thing that I can use for this particular thing? We just need more of that. So why don't you go think like whatever you think is the coolest style for a particular kind of object and make a cool art set for that. And it's like, I'm totally cool of you essentially being like a tiny art director in that sense, and you making your own choices of what the game needs. Or go into an existing world, look around and see like what visually here is the weakest. Then go make it better. And, so that requires a whole bunch of like, but not all people that you find, you will tell them that they can do that, but they end up then not doing it because they just like are a little bit too shy in taking initiative, and they just want like, very clear description of the asset that they need to be working on. Like that's how they're used to work or something like that. So that's the big challenge for me. Like I'm really looking for those people who can just come into the game is like, I'm going to make all this stuff better from what I'm good at. It's like, that's really one thing. It's going to result in the best game overall in the end. Also because, you know, I don't have time to go through every game world and analyze like what needs fixing. You know what I mean? I'm not even an artist. So, I mean, um, so those are the big things. And then of course, yeah, there's other things like, communication skills, very important if you're working remote. Um, being able to organize your own stuff. So, but the big ones are definitely like someone who knows how to drive the game forward themselves and make it better, and just generally getting someone with really good skills from wherever in the world. Um, yeah.
I like to think about it as like there's a triad of qualities that make a good forget employee. I mean just colleague in general. Like because team
Hmm.
culture is huge. It's
Yeah.
like you put a team together, like getting them to go through the storming, norming, performing part is that's very important, and they have to personalities to mesh and all that. But there's like this, I think it was Neil Gaiman had this philosophy of like, you need to you need to have 2 out of 3 at least qualities of like, are you on time? Are you pleasant to work with? And are you skilled at your job? And you can be pleasant to work with and then skilled at your job and late all the time, and most people will still tolerate you,
Hmm.
or any combination of the 3, but you need to. It's very rare you get someone who's like so good that they're late and shitty as to be around, and you'll still want to have them there.
I think
But
I think I've been lucky that I can honestly say of all the people that are currently working and that we've had working in the past, that no one really qualifies as shitty in any kind of way. They've all been pretty nice to work with. So
Yeah.
all friendly people. So that's
In a small unit, that's pretty attainable.
Yeah.
You know, like same thing with us, where I think everybody gets along super well. You know, nobody has
Mhm.
any issues, and we have the freedom as a small company to be, you know, like somebody's like, hey, you know, I don't have bandwidth for this or whatever. I'm burnt out, or I'm going to go on vacation or whatever. I was like, that's cool. I mean, because every single person here is going to do that at some point. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you know, got to go to the hospital. Fine. You know, I don't ever think that anyone should be like neglecting their children for their work if they don't, you know, they
Oh,
don't need to
no.
do that. Yeah. But there are companies that absolutely will. And yeah, coming from the military, absolutely don't give a shit. like,
Oh, in
hey,
that respect,
yeah, yeah,
how you treat your employees. Well,
yeah,
that's the funny thing. Like, first of all, if you're working remote with people, it's like I have no idea how these people are working anyway. I'm mostly looking at like what their output is, not like what hours they're working. Um,
me too.
but yeah, I've never so far have asked anyone to do any kind of overtime or that kind of stuff, or they can always just kind of organize their own life around the job. Let's hope we can keep it that way.
I think in my experience, working with people who are highly motivated and genuinely care about, you know, their
Mhm.
work and the overall product and everything, more often than not, I'm having to tell people like, "Hey, take a break. Like, you don't have to
Yep.
work on Saturday. Like, please go to a movie or something." Is more often than saying, like, "I need you to keep up." Like,
Mhm.
that almost never happens. Like, there in general, it's like, "Hey, you know, if you get to a point where it's like someone's got too much," it's like, I, as the manager, as the project manager, I need to figure out a way that this works for you. It's my
Mhm.
job, not to ask you to do more. Maybe you need a second pair of hands. Pride can come into that as well, you know, where you'll have someone who wants to do everything and then
Mhm.
having to be like, look, I need you to learn to delegate this. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you know, I don't need you to do every single little task yourself. I would rather hire two more people and have you delegate and give feedback so that you're not working yourself to death trying to make this happen. Like, I mean, I
Yep.
have to respect your autonomy that's your choice, but also like the last thing that I need is for my best artists to burn themselves out and, you know, have to go, you know, on a vision quest in the desert for 40 days while we're trying to meet a deadline. Like, we don't want that either. It makes more money for me to spend on more people than it does for me to lose you. Um,
Yep. Absolutely
yeah,
have definitely seen those patterns.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, just personality meshing all the way around, like, you've got to have someone who can both see the micro level of, like, what they're doing and also, like, how does this fit into the overall vision, and with a small team, that's pretty, you
Mhm.
know, "This is what you did today, we're implementing it into the build right now, now we're all gonna test it together. Let's all say what we think about it." I prefer it this way, much more than I did working with, like, gigantic teams.
Mm.
Because I've been in situations where I've, like, walked up to someone who was clearly having a terrible day, and I'm like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And they're like, "Well, you know, blah, blah, blah is going on at home." And I'm like, "Why don't you just go home and deal with that?" And they're like, "Well, I can't, I have all this work to do." And I'm like, "Have you talked to your manager?" And they're like, "I don't know who my manager is." And I'm like, "That's inexcusable. Like, that's not okay. I'm telling you to go home, and if your manager has a problem with it, they can argue with me about it. Just give them my name or something." Um, but
Yeah, I can really
and
cannot picture that, these kind of job situations where where you feel like this is just no way out because otherwise your manager's gonna fire you if you don't keep on working or something.
especially if you
That
don't know who
seems
that person is. It's like borderline
Yeah, that's
1984 type of thing.
yeah. Yeah, that all doesn't sound great.
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. If you love this show and you love supporting indie video games, please take a moment to check out In the Keep's upcoming Stellar Valkyrie. Built in the GZ Doom engine, this retro first-person shooter puts you in the universe of space bird bounty hunter Falco, who is on a mission to save his ex-girlfriend from the evil Black Star cult. Just type birdgame.space, that's BIRD game.space into your browser. Hit enter, smash the wishlist button, and stay tuned.
Um, we touched earlier on like the cultural Dutch thing of being rude, but I like to
Hmm.
use the word assertive, and I would say a lot of people simply are not assertive. Where it's like you could know who your manager was, but you're so not through your own fault, but you're paralyzed by the fear of like if I do anything, if I ask for more money, if I say I need a day off, something will happen that I don't understand. And I'm like, honestly, in a lot of situations, if you just walk up to somebody and be like, "Hey, I'm dealing with this.
Mm.
Goodbye," they're not gonna even they never had any intention of punishing you for that at all. They just don't know that you're suffering. But
That too. It really
that's where
depends on a company culture. That there are some companies where people just have fear for asking something, and for good reason, because it's just that kind of company where if you stick your head out, then it's going to get cut, kind of thing. But
yeah,
typically, yes, you you should be asking, and you should hopefully work in a company where that's cool.
yeah. I've I maybe not on purpose, but I tend to reward people who are just like, "Hey, I have an issue and I wanna fucking raise it up to the top of I'm like,
Absolutely,
"Yes,
yeah.
yes, thank God, please." Everyone look, this person's saying something. They're
Hmm.
giving feedback. Constructive feedback is good. Let's argue about it. Like, even if you hate me for like, if you're coming at me like angrily, I'm like, I want to hear it. Please
Hmm.
give it all, and then we can figure it out together. But I totally get why. Like, if you have an organization of 500 people, you can't have those conversations. And there's a lot of tendency for. I hate an absentee CEO more than anything. Like, if you don't have that open door policy and that you're approachable and stuff, or if you're just like leaving things and be like, I'm just gonna go do this and I'll check in. Because what you have is that person comes back and then sees that things have gone in a direction that they're not comfortable with, and then they make a bunch of changes after work has already been done. Can't
Hmm.
stand it. Like, don't make people do the same thing twice unless it's absolutely necessary. And
That's
that
that's yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say is like that's one of the good things I picked up at a company like Google is like they're very big on like one-on-ones where you have like
Mhm.
regularly scheduled meetings with your manager, and they don't have any agenda whatsoever, because the whole point is that your manager's ass is like, how are you doing, how are you feeling, and that's because a lot of people, they might feel bad, or things are not going well, or they're kind of struggling in their work, or they don't know where to go next, but they
Yeah.
don't feel the strength to bring it up to someone because it somehow feels weak or whatever. So when you have this open-ended, and I noticed like in these kind of meetings that people will bring stuff up, and I'm doing it in my own company as well. And you have these meetings, and people bring stuff up. It's like, oh wow, this is important. We need to address this. We need to fix it and make this better for you. But until you have that meeting, they will not bring it up, kind of thing. They will not set a meeting for you on like a different time. I've always
Yeah.
said like, if there's anything, just just come ping me and we'll talk about it like right the minute that you're experiencing it. But people tend to not do that. There's too much of a threshold of saying, I have something I don't feel 100% good about. So you need to
Yeah.
almost force it on people. It's like you need to be asking people all the time. It's like, hey, is there something that you that's not working for you right now? And if you ask it that explicitly, then usually they feel okay to saying like, actually, you know, this is just this could be better. And then you go fix it.
I uh I think I've said a lot of negative things about the military, but it's not all negative. One of the
Mhm.
things that the Air Force in particular is quite good at is exactly what you just described. Like, it also comes down to the individual leader themselves. But when I
Mm.
was a staff sergeant, anyone who was under my leadership, I would do exactly that. I'm like, we're gonna
Oh.
have regular check in. Like, what are your goals? Are
Mhm.
you okay? What's going on in your personal life? Because all I really care about is, the mission gets done here, and then what's more important than that is are you being served by your service? So, like,
Mhm.
if I have one guy who's like, I wanna I wanna go to, officer training school, and I wanna be a lieutenant, and then I wanna learn how to fly an airplane and all that stuff, and I'm like, "Okay, how can we make this work for you? Like, what's the best case scenario where we take what, in my case, it was a meteorology department. I'm like, okay, let's work on
Mhm.
your degree. Let's get you into the right program so that you can apply for those things. Make sure you have a
Oh,
good
wow. Mm.
evaluation package or whatever so that we can do that. And then you have someone like me when I'm talking to my supervisor, they're like, what are your goals? And, in the Air Force, I'm like, to get out in a couple of years and go start a company because I really want to be in the video game business And then I was lucky to have people who were like, yeah, okay, so how do we support that? Like we still have to do your job while you're here, but we can make this work for you. So instead of there's this thing where you're kind of expected to do a certain amount of like volunteer hours per year. It's that kind of thing,
Mhm.
or whatever. But like, well, maybe instead of doing volunteer work by going and working at the animal shelter or whatever on your weekends, uh, come up with a way that you can do. So a lot of charity tournaments that I had put on in the past was like, okay, I'm gonna put Quake and charity together. We're gonna have a tournament. We're
Mm.
gonna give all the proceeds to charity. Everyone wins, raise a bunch of money and all that kind of thing. And then at the end of the year, like, what did you do volunteer wise? Like, well, I organized an entire thing where tons of gamers ended up raising a couple $1,000s or whatever and giving that to the Florence Nightingale Foundation. And then when you read that to the promotions people, they're not saying like, oh, you didn't do anything. They're saying like, wow, this guy has real leadership qualities,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
communicating that. And even in the company culture, say it's Google, you may have one person who's like, all I want to do is just like do my job and go home. I want to come in here, I want to crank out UI assets, and then I want to go spend time with my kids. That's great. Let's put
Mhm.
you in a situation where that lifestyle works for you. And the same thing with, you have someone who says, well, I really want, I'm looking for promotions. I want to move up in the business. I want to learn how this whole business works. And then I want to go start a competitor company. Great. How do we get you to that point?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And not crush your dreams by saying like, no, you're going to work for Google. I had a boss that said that to me. He's like, you're going to work for me for the rest of your life. I'm like, okay. He- His business is no longer,
Why do
it no
people
longer
want that?
exists. Uh, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know. But I'll never be that way. And I learned that lesson from having someone tell me that. So I'm glad I have a few people, not like I'm going to go, have them on a hit list, but like who said really negative things to me that hurt at the time. And then like I look back and I'm like, I'm really glad Mr. Crabtree in high school told me that I would just be a flunky if I didn't go straight to college, because
Yeah.
now I can look back and say, you motivated me to show you you were wrong.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Love that.
I guess the last little bit here, I wanted to touch on like your teaching side of things. So you worked in the
All
university
right.
system and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I taught at the Guildhall SMU in Texas
Mhm.
for some 8 years or something like that. So it was a good amount of time. I helped build that school up, and it was really cool because it was like kind of the first time we were doing like a game development school and working with the local game developers. And yeah, that was really, really fun and helping. Of course, from in my case, it was the programming curriculum that I was busy with. Uh, yeah, had a really good time there, and I taught some couple of hundred students there, and pretty much all of them went into the games industry in various places. I'm still in contact with a lot of them, so
Yeah.
it was a really awesome time.
Were you primarily teaching like programming, game design principles, or?
Not any game design. I was just definitely only on the programming side, and particularly teaching them how to build various components of an engine. So, graphics, programming, character animation. Of course, me being a programming language fanatic, I would throw in a course on how to build your own scripting language for
Mm.
a for a game engine kind of thing. Um, and yeah, just various topics related to game engines, and that was a lot of fun.
What were some of the more interesting things that you would teach? Like, so let's just say I'm showing up today. It's a design engine 101. How do you inspire me to think about this in a different way? Say I'm a student who's just taking this class for no real reason, and you wanna suck me in, be like, this is what's cool about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. The interesting thing is, like, I wasn't particularly pushy on, like, you need got to structure your engine this way, because these were students that it was a master's program. So students would come in with already like a bachelor's in computer science or whatever. So they think they already know programming kind of thing. So in terms of like the structuring of the engine, I would kind of let them do their own thing. But then as they were doing their own thing, I would review their code with them and then um kind of ask them questions, seeing like whether that was ideal, and kind of steer them in other ways. The cool thing about that program was that it was very hands on. So I would do like a lecture for maybe like up to an hour or something like that on like whatever topic we're doing, and that would be just something practical. It's like how we're going to do you know normal mapping or we're going to implement like a BSP tree, or or we can do character animation engine or something like that. But then the rest of the class would be like several hours of like hands-on time where I'm basically working directly with the students on their particular engine, and their engines grow out to be like, very, very different from each other. And that's kind of where the a lot of the interesting work is. Just kind of help them and shape that. And of course, they're going to compare amongst each other, like how they're approaching things. And kind of my favorite parts would be the things that would eventually like turn out to be more about software engineering. How do you make this stuff maintainable? It keeps growing and growing, and certain things are becoming harder and harder to change. Like how do you deal with that? Um, so that would give me opportunity to teach like all sorts of other like unrelated things to like just building an engine, like as part of that. And I have interesting classes just purely on like refactoring, those kind of topics. Um, so yeah, it was pretty varied. It was a lot of fun.
What is an engine?
Ah, well, people define that differently, I guess. And that's an interesting question because, like, for example, the engine that I'm building right now has a completely, utterly different structure from most game engines. Um, and certainly the engines these guys were building. I mean, nowadays an engine, you look at Unity and Unreal, is like they're just these behemoths. It's just gigantic. Um, and of course, what they were building was much smaller. But yeah, uh, um, in the end, anything, and even something small can be an engine. Just rendering some bunch of things on screen. I think the big thing is that you're working directly on the graphics abstraction layers rather than just adopting those from somewhere else. That's when you're building an engine, I suppose. I don't know. I don't have really a clear definition of like what's an engine, what's not an engine. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I find it fascinating. It's almost a philosophical topic at a certain point. Like
Yeah.
I think about it like it's a machine that does work for you to a certain degree, where it's like
Hmm.
you know, even in the sense of a physical, like an internal combustion engine is like it does more work with less input than you alone would do. A
Hmm.
bicycle pedal is an engine, like because in the physical sense, you are doing work, but it's less than the input you put into it. Or sorry, it's the work that is output is more than what you personally are doing. So you're moving faster
Right.
than you would be moving your feet at the same rate, you know, without the
But in
bicycle
a
involved.
very abstract sense, that's what an engine is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
surely, yeah, it does a whole bunch of the heavy lifting of you implementing a game. I think an important thing about an engine is, of course, that it must be able to implement different kinds of game. If something can only implement one kind of game, then it's really more like a game than an
Right.
engine. Um, but yeah, an interesting thing, for example, about our engine is that we're flipping things completely upside down. Like most engines are this block of complex C++, and then maybe it'll call out to like Lua, whatever, as being a scripting language, just to update some objects. We're doing the opposite way around. It's like we have a scripting language or a programming language that the entire engine is written in. And then only some heavy lifting happens in some C++ libraries. But um, so it's almost like you take the roles of like normally in an engine, the C++ is what's in control and what's driving the overall structure of like how everything connects in the engine. In our case, that's completely not the case. The scripting language is the one that's in control, and the C++ is just like library functions, if you will. And also, our engine is more tightly integrated with the kind of game that we're making than something like Unreal or Unity is, of course. So, which is cool because it affords us a lot of simplicity. If you try to make an engine that can do actually every genre on every platform, like, yeah, you just signed yourself up for like an enormous amount of complexity. So,
I had a friend attempt to do that, um, and it consumed him. Like I legitimately like ruined his career that he was so
really,
fixated on trying to make this work in every conceivable purpose that you never. That happens with any sort of project where it's like if you try to do too much, every scientist will say like my theory, I have to figure out the end of this before I die. And it was the
hmm,
same sort of thing where it's like, in this particular scenario, the guy was like making a game and he was trying to make this work for this game, and he was also at the same time trying to make this. And if any other potential thing came along, you would be able to use the same,
Yeah,
engine, and that the game never got finished, and it was
that
basically
is
because yeah,
that is such a stereotypical story. I'm sorry to say, like the
yeah,
amount of programmers that are attracted to this idea that the underlying, and they want to keep this completely general, just in case they might need it in the future. It's the biggest downfall of programmers
mhm,
everywhere. This kind of like planning for the future and then building lots of complex infrastructure and abstractions for the future and then never getting used is the number one mistake of programmers, I would call it. There's no bigger error that programmers make in general.
yeah,
Um, but it's attractive because as programmers, we love structuring things. It's all we do. We create structure. You just like, of course, building an engine has to work for everything. That's an enormous amount of structure. It's like an endless sandbox of you being able to invent new pieces of structures and new abstractions and new things. And how should we put this all together? And like, what tools can we build for this? It's just endless amount of fun. But yeah, it will
yeah.
also kill you.
Well, I think about, Isaac Newton, and he's trying to discover the Philosopher's Stone, doing alchemy and
Mhm.
adding together all the numbers in the Bible to try to figure out when Jesus is coming back and things like that. And it takes another guy like Edmund Halley to be like, "Hey, we have this like real finite problem of figuring out when this comet is gonna fly through. You think you could do that?" And then, Newton is like, "Oh, I did that years ago. I just didn't think it was important, but I lost it. I'll go write it down again for you real quick, and then I'm gonna get back to the Philosopher's Stone
Yeah,
thing, because that's what's important to me." But there's such a tendency to kinda try to have your theory of everything, and it's like, you're
yeah.
you're always in between, like, do you see the forest for the trees or you don't see the trees for the forest? And yeah, it's very interesting. I am
That's
not a
like
programmer.
programmers.
I took enough
Yeah.
programming classes to know it's not my path in life, but I do find it fascinating.
Well, in some sense, I am the epitome of that kind of programmer in some kind of way because I'm always
Mhm.
building new programming language to build my next project on top of.
Right.
So, I can definitely be accused of making that mistake myself. But so far I've managed to not go too wild on spending time on the programming language. So I guess it's working out.
Do you find that, working in custom things makes it more difficult to hire people who can then easily translate what they're doing into what you're doing?
Um, yes and no. I definitely thought about that it would be, there definitely was the question, like when we turned like what was at the time like my hobby slash research project into like this is going to become a company and a game product.
Mhm.
That definitely thought came to my mind is like, this would be a moment like, do I rewrite everything that I've built here in, in pure C++ or Rust or whatever, or something that's a little bit more palatable to the average programmer. Um, I decided not to for many reasons. So there will be certain programmers that like a lot of programmers they have like a certain language they want to work in, and if that's not what you're offering, they're off the table, and that's fine. There's also programmers to which this kind of stuff is attractive. And certainly, like my good friend Ben, that's one of the programmers I've been working with the longest. He had already been interested in working with the language that I made before he even got hired, and it was just totally not an issue for him. Like, oh, that's cool. That'd probably be fun to work with. And he's also into compilers and stuff like that. So there's a certain kind of programmer for which is like almost like a bonus. Um, but yeah, I've definitely, recently hired a graphics programmer, and I did get some candidates, particularly like the more experienced ones that like, I'm used to working on Unreal, and I work in C++ and Unreal with these kind of shader languages. That's what I do, and that's what I know. And these people, they looked at my engine and they're like, "What the hell is going on here?" kind of thing. And I could tell that wasn't attracting them. But that's also good. It's like I want to. Um, though not long ago, I actually did a talk for a graphics and engine um, online conference. React, it's called. It's again sometime soon.
Right.
Um, and I did a talk for that, particularly explaining like our engine structure and how that relates to us having that custom programming language or whatever. And I got so many of the of the engine people in there in the Discord and going like, oh my god, this is just like, this sounds like a dream to work for kind of thing, or this be like refreshing, and it is such a completely grounds up overhaul of like what it means to be an engine, and throwing away lots of the amount of cruft that you normally get if you use Unreal or similar. So in the end, it kind of bifurcates the people in terms of, and there's plenty of people around that I can always find the people in the latter half for whom it's a bonus. But it's a good point that you mentioned this, because it's definitely, when I do look for these people, just kind of gauging whether this is for them, it's a bonus or it's a detriment. That is definitely an important part of the hiring process, because otherwise there's no point. I don't want to have people that are doing stuff against their will. At some point, work with someone and they clearly didn't like it, and they were going like, "Where's the debugger?" It's like, this thing doesn't have a debugger. How am I supposed to work with this? And of course, my reaction was I immediately implemented debugger. And it's like, okay, here's the debugger, but that doesn't necessarily made that person that happy as a consequence. So if someone has like a very strong feeling that they want to be working with a certain language, you're just not going to fix that.
That's true. Uh, Even outside of languages, like just if someone sort of like has a lane, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I mean, like,
Mhm.
this is the lane that I want to be in, and I'm not
Yep.
open to changing my workflow or to doing things in a different way. And from an employability standpoint, I'm always going to encourage people to like learn to be elastic. Like, I'm not
Mm.
necessarily saying don't do what you want to be doing, but what I am saying is that like if you are going to be working for other people and not the head of your own project, then the more versatility you have, the more hireable you are.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a Unity person, you're like, I only work in Unity. That's the only thing I intend to learn how to do. And then one day, the games industry pivots away from like, it just doesn't work anymore. It's not the industry standard. Same thing with a video editor. You only know Adobe Premiere, and then
Mhm.
an alternative like DaVinci comes along, and you have a company. They're like, well, we use DaVinci tools because we're not willing to pay for the Adobe suite, and you have to relearn everything that you already know.
Yeah.
Uh, Makes you not a good candidate for that particular thing. So I
I
totally
think
get that.
I think what a lot of people are underestimating, they think that if I spend the entire 10 years of my career so far in one technology, I'll therefore be the best at it, and therefore will be the strongest for that kind of thing. What they're underestimating, particularly in the example of programming languages, is that using different programming languages changes how you think about programming and makes you a better programmer overall. So you can spend like time in multiple programming languages, and you'll actually be a better programmer in one of those languages that you have learned, compared to someone who spent only that time in one language, and they really don't have the picture of what does it all really mean to structure code, and what's all possible kind of thing. It's almost related to the topic we had earlier about living in different languages and in different in different languages in different countries. And um, and only then figuring out what your own culture is like and how it's different, and what you want to adopt and what you want to throw away. Um, Same with programming languages or graphics APIs or a whole bunch of other things. Um, and and you can only know that once you actually do it. So
Uh,
it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem there, right?
Specifically from the point of view of just language in general, it's like the more languages you know, the closer you're getting to the source,
Yeah.
which is not like, what does this particular word mean in English or in German or in
Hmm.
Greek, whatever it happens to be. It's like, if you understand the etymology of the word you're using, it has a much
Absolutely.
deeper, richer meaning. And so from a coding standpoint, it's like, yeah, I'm not saying
Yeah.
you need to know everything in binary necessarily, but it's like, if you understand what this actually is doing behind the scenes, like, what you're leveling up, you're initiating yourself into like a point where you have a real understanding of the topic. The difference
Yeah.
between a first year bachelor student and a doctorate, where it's like you understand this in a philosophical level where you can really break it down and think about it in a very broad, you know, way. So like, my
Yeah.
fascination with learning, languages in general has always been that. It's like, I got to a point where I'm like, okay, if I really want to understand this, I need to learn Latin, or I need to go get a book on ancient Greek or Hebrew and like figure this out from that standpoint, because this word is more than meets the eye, so to speak. The letter here is more than meets the eye. It has deeper meaning than that. That is intrinsic in what is being communicated, but just not on the surface level.
Yeah. Your
Yeah.
brain basically starts clustering like all those different languages, and it becomes like a more general concept in your brain.
Right.
And that certainly worked with programming languages. Also, your speed of learning those new things just becomes higher and higher because of that, because you see those general concepts. I, for example, sometimes find that like the best programmers are the ones that can understand everything in terms of memory. It's like, okay, you're programming Java. What does it mean to allocate an object? What does it do with that? Where does it put it? How does the garbage collect it? And, for someone who's worked in other languages, you can actually kind of see through the language as if the language is transparent and see what the language is doing, how it's implemented. And that means you just understand everything about the language. And not only you understand how fast things are or how to work with it, but every new language just becomes like a different mapping to these kind of general concepts. And you can just learn a new language in no time. It's like,
Yeah.
and it's extremely powerful, and it just makes you write way better code in any of those languages.
I find that it is less so when you're dealing with young people, like really, really young people. If you're teaching them any new skill at all, they kind of learn the same way that they learn their native language, so to speak. Like by just doing it.
Mhm.
But there's a point where if you're teaching someone in my case, it was like you're going to learn Arabic. The first thing we're going to do is spend like a while teaching you your own language in terms of structure and not just in the way that you understand it when you think. So,
Mm.
what is a cognate? What is an article? What is an antonym and a synonym? And what is a metaphor? And then once you understand that, it's like, okay, now when I present this to you in a new language, even though it's not going to translate word for word, uh, you'll understand the broader idea of what is being done here. It's like there is no word for is or to be in Arabic or most Semitic languages. There is no like,
Mm.
this is that. It's like this, that, and it's implied.
Mm.
Or, what is a vowel versus a consonant can be very challenging when you start talking about Semitic languages, because it's like most of the vowels are implied.
Mhm.
And some things that we think of in English or just in, Western Latin based languages in general as vowel, it's like, what if you use it as a consonant? So like the ein in Arabic sounds like vowel to us, but they use it as a consonant, at the beginning
Mm.
of a word that is going to continue from there. Um, I can only imagine how that translates into coding language, but I think I understand your metaphor, so to speak.
Yep. It's definitely I did some point study linguistics, so I'm a little
Yeah.
familiar with
Yeah.
these kind of concepts. Yeah.
I really want to thank you for coming on the show, man. This has been very enlightening and like just cool to see what you're doing.
Awesome.
I don't have a lot of experience with this specific genre of games. I mean, I do on the first person shooter side, obviously.
Mhm.
RPG elements I get. Survivor games, like the only ones that I've really dived into are like Raft. And then I was talking with a friend about
Okay.
the forest and stuff like that later, So
Mhm.
the crafting element for me has been the biggest challenge. I've certainly run into situations where I'm like, I should have destroyed that item and got the blueprint for it before I continued this level. But it's all in the fun of learning how something new works.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Super interesting. And
Thank you very much to Wouter for coming on the show. I really, really enjoyed that conversation, man. It's rare that we get to deep dive into kind of the business side of things in that way. So I'm hoping that helps a lot of people out there who are dreaming of starting their own game studio or something similar, or even just any small business at all. That's kind of like one of my passions, if you didn't notice. So yeah, I also want to thank our Patreon supporters. So thank you to Brad, Fred, Michael, Ant, and Shannon. Y'all rule. Be sure and look in the show notes, and if you're interested, back that Kickstarter for Voxile. It's going to be a really cool game. I have enjoyed every moment of playing the demo thus far. And that's it. I love you. God love you. Stay in the keep. keep.com. inthekeep.com. In the keep.
Hi, I'm Ben, host of the Field and Foley podcast. Every episode I sit down with incredible guests, not just sound designers, field recorders or musicians, but experts in everything about audio. We explore the creative process behind the sounds that shape our favorite games, films and experiences. Whether you're an audio professional or just someone who loves great sound, Field and Foley offers deep dives, behind-the-scenes stories and insights you won't hear anywhere else.